Our narrative unfolds amidst a ferocious conflagration between a company of champions and a minotaur. One of them, a flaxen-haired warrior, vaults skyward toward the minotaur, while another, a raven-tressed enchanter, conjures a fire assault from beneath. The twin onslaughts connect concurrently, prompting the beast to bellow in fury. Yet despite that, it doesn't appear it has been impacted greatly. Instead, it just seems far more enraged. The creature sets its attention on the swordsman initially and brandishes a massive axe at him. He's narrowly able to evade. Just as the minotaur hunkers into a lower posture and readies to rush, it seems it's planning to surge directly into the third associate of the group, a youthful silver-haired thaumaturge who has been observing the clash from afar this entire period. The mage pivots and alerts him to sidestep, but the lad named Kyle grins in reply as a frigid zephyr starts to waft around it. There's no possibility she was advising him of all individuals to dodge, especially knowing what he's proficient of. An ice sliver materializes in his palm and expands into a lengthy spear that he hurls directly at the minotaur, impaling it through the thorax. The behemoth disintegrates in vanquishment and in a flash. The battle is concluded that was almost too elementary. His two comrades hasten to him in apprehension after the minotaur collapses. He believes they're fretting for no cause. After all, they already perceive just how adept he is. There's no necessity to worry when Kyle can readily manage himself. He inquires if they still don't confide in his abilities, and the two stiffen in reaction. It wasn't quite like that naturally, but they were merely anxious for their master. Kyle beams at his two companions as they avert their gaze in discomposure, but then his vision darts to the earth. Once he recollects just how distant he has journeyed, it's challenging to accept that this is how he is presently, especially considering that the Kyle Celtarian of a few months prior was nowhere near this skillful. He was formerly a pampered youngster, confronting a looming demise, and utilizing his final days reclining in bed as a frail youth. Just 3 moons ago, in the annex of the Celtarian Marquisate, the structure's domestics convened to heed the grievances of one of their own, who was tasked with attending to Lord Kyle. She cannot endure it further, since there is not a solitary day that elapses tranquilly without the brat becoming irate and shouting. Today, shouting wasn't even the culmination of it, and even contrived to strike her with something, making the spot to tumify. She didn't desire to enter his chamber anymore. But what can they accomplish, since they're the ones responsible for delivering his sustenance and remedies? It may be unproductive, since he never consumes the victuals that they present, but it's their duty, and there's naught they can do regarding it. One of the maids ponders if the motive for his demeanor is because he is the offspring of a paramour. That remark was a stride too distant. Regardless how much they detest him, he's still a juvenile, and even the other maids dislike hearing that concerning it. They caution her to mind her speech, while the other maid contends for someone else to tend to Kyle. It appears like no one wishes to do it, since everyone abhors attending to him. That is until one of the younger maids volunteers to transport his food and medicine. To the miscreant, her name is Urgel, and the other maids gaze at her as if she just sprouted a second cranium. She takes the platter with his items on it and proceeds to his room, while the other maids observe on. Is it going to be all right for her to venture there like this? This is the initial occasion the younger girl has ever offered for anything optimistically. The young master won't strike her as soon as he perceives her. Well, there's no retracting for her now, especially as she poises before his imposing door. A bead of perspiration trickles down her cheek as she steps through the 2 colossal doors that seal off his chamber. She calls out to him as she enters the room with his provisions, but there's no reply within. The mound on his bed respires silently and doesn't answer the young maid's summons. With no sound to indicate that anyone is conscious, she admits herself into the room and navigates through the clutter of shattered cups, tattered volumes, and marred furnishings to position his food on his bedside table. Now that she's in his chamber, she finally discerns a shock of white hair emerging from underneath the bedclothes. He's been slumbering this whole duration in this room brimming with disarray. Well before he awakens, it would be most prudent if she took a moment to tidy the area up, so he doesn't get injured by all the shards on the floor. When he finally rouses, as she pivots to depart the room and fetch some cleaning implements. A hand snatches hers in a trice before she can react. Kyle is now entirely awake and clenches his teeth while glaring down at her. He demands to know who she is and why she's in his chamber. The young maid apprehensively discloses her name and reminds him that he had once rescued her. Then she apologizes for entering his room without sanction, as she didn't realize that he was dozing. Kyle only clasps her hand tighter as he reiterates the name in bewilderment, causing her to emit a cry of discomfort. It seems like he had proceeded a little bit too far, and that propels him out of his sudden ire at her. He releases her hand and apologizes for his abrupt outburst, and thankfully she's still unharmed despite the ache in her hand. Kyle appears to be in a stupor after waking, as he unsteadily surveys around his disheveled room. What on the globe is transpiring, and why is this youth in a maid's attire? He observes the remedy and repast on the counter and inquires about it. Ursiel affirms that it is his medicine and meal for the day. However, his gruel has grown tepid, so she would need to go reheat it and return it for him. With that, she departs, and Kyle is only more perplexed about the entire circumstance. Did she state that was his medication? And when the universe occurred to his physique, he cautiously descends from a bed and ambles to the nearest looking glass to view himself for the first time. Is that what he resembles? This cannot be. This is the visage of a video game persona. Not him. The one inhabiting the body of Kyle Salterian was not Kyle whatsoever. He tousled his hair in trepidation as he gazed in the mirror. Lee Hyun-woo, a renowned game broadcaster from another realm, had somehow transmigrated into the form of a character from a game he frequently played, designated Fantasy Defense. At that juncture, he comprehended that he had somehow awakened in another world. The character Kyle Salterian is a video game NPC that manifests in his cherished game. He is the youngest scion of the Salterian Marquis dynasty, which is celebrated for their blade mastery. As one of the figures from the Salterian lineage, he was embroiled in many initial game occurrences. In scenarios where he interacts with the protagonist of the narrative, he always gets thoroughly trounced, and he's typically overcome in a single strike by a minion tier monster, conjured by a villain in essence. He's not even component of the primary ensemble of NPC figures. He's an absolute peripheral role. That sort of character is whom Lee Hyun-woo had awakened, as he resolves to check if he's dreaming by nipping himself in the cheek. The instant pain and the crimson mark on his face subsequently establishes that he in actuality is not slumbering. This was all genuine. Now that he is certain that this is actuality and not some manner of distorted reverie, he persists to stare at himself in the mirror in vexation. How could this have befallen him? Lee Hyun-woo, who was formerly the #1 participant in the Fantasy Defense global standings, has now transformed into an inconsequential and valueless character. Fantasy Defense is a virtual reality diversion that will become a sensation worldwide. By 2030, due to its fiendishly arduous levels, no one had completed it even after 10 years of it being available. On top of that, it was wickedly entertaining, and its allure continued to expand its renown in the game. There were ratings allocated based on gameplay approach and mission completion on a global ranking spectrum. The scores escalate notably when uncommon quests are fulfilled or rare artifacts are procured. And the individual who stood atop it all, after dedicating 10 years of his existence into the game, was Lee Hyun-woo, the most celebrated streamer for the game. He knew arcane magic, sigils, and legendary combination recipes that others didn't. He was genuinely the living lexicon of the game, and he possessed overwhelming scores that no one could ever aspire to surpass. And for someone so distinguished to be embodied by such a feeble and worthless character can only be a merciless twist of destiny. This is a game where even the protagonist with extraordinary aptitudes can't conquer the higher echelons. So how is he supposed to endure more than that, since he has replayed this game so many instances? At this juncture, he already knows the destiny of Kyle Salterian very distinctly. The ultimate objective of Fantasy Defense is to halt the powers of darkness. The one who invoked those somber forces was Adolf, the second scion of the Salterian Marquis dynasty. The second scion was aspiring for the station of head of the Celtarian family, and he hoped to utilize dark energies to instigate an uprising. In the culmination, the entire Celtarian domain falls into desolation and becomes a stronghold for the dark powers that have been coveting human territory for a prolonged time. In the core of all this pandemonium, Kyle Celtarian, who is utterly powerless, was butchered ruthlessly by those same entities. Perhaps if he just vacates the estate before the insurrection even erupts, that would be adequate to keep him alive. That's just a provisional remedy, though, and the genuine predicament resides elsewhere. This new aristocratic body of his is afflicted by a malady called hermum. It's an ailment that obstructs the mana conduits in the body. In this realm, mana is the fount of aura and sorcery, which are both vital for existence. Mana is as crucial as ichor in the body, and those impacted by hermum have blocked the channels in their physique, which signifies that they neglect to obtain the sustenance required for survival and development. That typically means that they perish before the age of 20. The sole cure for hermum is to assimilate the mana from the natural surroundings in order to surmount the affliction. However, since the pathways are obstructed, they cannot accept mana, and this hermum is practically the same as possessing a fatal illness. Kyle Celtarian was identified with his terminal malady at a tender age, and he has been suffused with desolation ever since. The dread of mortality, the disquiet, and the despair over the finite time he has remained loomed over him like a specter. And because of that, his disposition became warped. Before he realized it, he became a blight to his kin, and his sire commanded him to remain in his chamber and contemplate his conduct. There he persisted, to seethe in wrath at the notion that his family deemed him a mockery and someone who could readily be exploited. His fury at the cosmos and at everyone in it burgeoned and burgeoned, until he ultimately perished in other terms. The fellow was bereft of hope even in the game. It was perpetually evident that he was a forlorn character, even though he was a terminally ailing patient. His dreadful personality is the primary catalyst for people to relinquish him, to encapsulate the circumstances. Our lad now has inhabited an exceptionally hopeless figure who has no aptitude or faculty for either swordsmanship or sorcery. No duration of life, remaining a ghastly disposition, a dreadful standing, and to crown it all off, he is restricted to his chamber by the head of the family. This is akin to initiating nightmare mode on a new RPG game. From the outset, he is already undone, whether he remains stationary in his room or attempts to flee. The unavoidable culmination for him is demise. How is he even meant to subsist in this world with those kinds of attributes? Isn't it customary to acquire at least one or two cheat abilities when you get transmigrated? It would be preferable if he at least possessed some kind of status display, or something analogous, as he mulls over what guided him to this predicament. Luminous azure orbs start to gleam around him. Just a moment previously, there was nothing like this in the vicinity. Just where did this originate from? The young patrician reaches out cautiously and grazes the orb, which causes a radiance burst to erupt from his hand. Once it dissipates, a status panel with a few pivotal messages materializes before him. He had awakened, and because of that, he will now obtain 2 new aptitudes, which encompass access to a status panel and the mind's eye faculty, which will be engaged automatically from this point onward, as if it were invoked by him. The status panel manifests directly before his eyes and displays the present statistics of his new physique. He has 2 new talents designated mana pathways and mind's eye. What could mana pathways signify, though? Well, for a beginning, mind's eye permits you to perceive the intricate specifications of individuals and gear around you. Mana pathways, however, is an entirely novel talent that he had never encountered previously. Judging from the designation, it appears to be linked to sorcery in some fashion. But magic talents are meant to be under the mana companion aptitude, even though he has never witnessed this talent before. His gamer prescience informs him that this talent is somehow superior to mana companion, and it might even be a premier tier talent. Well, he possessed the mana companion faculty. He was never capable to see anything like the orbs surrounding him. With his own vision, this is unadulterated mana energy itself, and if his conjecture is accurate, he should be able to assimilate it for himself. The aristocrat extends his hand and touches one of the pure mana globules before him. Instantly he does. he starts to perceive the mana coursing through his body. It traverses through his arm until it halts abruptly. It seems like this is one of the manifestations of the Hermann malady. The obstructed conduit prevents the mana from fully permeating his entire physique. He was so near to feeling mana flowing through his body, and this was not going to deter him. Through sheer volition alone, he starts to compel the mana to move through the obstruction by duress. Through his directive, he wills the mana to penetrate through the blockage and compel its way into the remainder of his body. He makes the mana as acute as a needle, then propels it against the impediment, gradually thrusting through, until finally he starts to perceive the mana coursing through his physique. It's only up to his elbows for the present, but if he persists to accumulate mana like this and push through each blockage the manner he just performed, then he'd be capable to overcome her Mimyu as well. Owing to that, he will not perish, and there will be prospect for him after all. Back in the scullery, Ursula has concluded warming her master's gruel. She has to expedite and return it to him before it chills anew. As she prepares to transport the sustenance back up to encounter him, a cluster of maids approaches to accost her. They instruct her not to give that nourishment to Kyle and stand obstructing the portal to the kitchen. Ursi regards them somewhat bewildered, as the maids persist to elucidate that. As a remonstrance to Lord Kyle's transgressions against the maids, they have united and resolved to temporarily cease serving him. If he endures hunger for a few days, then perhaps he will alter his views and his conduct towards them. So they direct her to place the food down and acquiesce with them. Ursula, on the contrary, can't be troubled with their demonstration. She tells them to undertake whatever they desire to do, while she continues to perform her labor. That rejoinder doesn't sit well with the maids at all. One of them vociferates at her in ire to at least feign affability. With that, she smacks the meal platter out of her grasp and onto the floorboards. She inquires if the young maid still fancies that she's some kind of noble. She originated from a dilapidated family and was vended into servitude. So how dare she retort to her fellow domestic? Ursula disregards her clamor, while the other maid restrains the angered one back. The young maid couldn't care less about the meanderings of her colleagues, as she continued to wipe the spilled victuals off the floor. That only infuriates the woman further, and she raises a hand to strike the child, who was genuflecting on the ground to cleanse the mess. Just then, the door swings ajar, and a flaxen-haired gentleman enters the room. The irate maid's hand immobilizes in midair. Everyone is astounded by Mr. Leonhardt's manifestation in the kitchen, as he angrily demands to know just what precisely is occurring in here. The other two only gaze at him in astonishment, as he passes them to inspect the disarray on the floor, and the younger girl struggling to rectify it. He exhales once he realizes that these two are just giving the young lass a difficult period. The repast for Lord Kyle is already tardy, and she needs to hasten and arrange another one to convey to him. Ursula concurs and departs to go prepare another serving of food, while the two maids stand diffidently to the side. Leonhardt pivots angrily to them once she exits, and it's evident that he's not gratified by what he just observed. Concurrently, Kyle continues to scrutinize his new faculties in the status menu. If he were to employ minds, eye, and mana pathways in conjunction, then it might even alter the destiny of the Marquis household, which was fated for a grisly downfall. He has been partaking in this game for 10 years at this juncture, and he possesses an advanced prescience level of intelligence. Furthermore, he was endowed with the great might and affluence of a nobleman. With all these elements on his side, then it might genuinely be feasible to thwart the forces of darkness from usurping. It seems like there are momentous things ahead of him, but initially he has to surmount his Hermama by unblocking the mana channels and mastering sorcery. Mana delay, for example, is an aptitude specialized in magic. With his new talent for sorcery, it would be more advantageous for him to become a wizard than a cavalier. The second matter he has to do is avert the ruin of the Marquis family, since he's part of this lineage. If the family prospers, then so will he. The Marquis of Celtrian will be a very steadfast buttress in terms of prestige, proficiency, opulence, and everything he could conceivably request. Since the domain is situated in the peripheries, he doesn't have to fret about the situation in the metropolis. Finally, and the most crucial thing, he has to muster talented confederates in order to ready for the colossal darkness, assault that he anticipates to transpire in the near future. If he were to choose a potentially gifted individual and make them his associates, that is how he's going to cultivate his potency. However, firstly, in order to assemble talent, he needs to scout around for someone proximate. Since he is the Marquis of Celta Leon, then he would have to commence with Lanehart, who was once a serviceable bulwark NPC while he engaged the game. As he continues to ponder about what he will undertake, a girl's voice hails him from the doorway. It's Ursi, who has returned with the sustenance she went to prepare for him. His eyes widen as he beholds her, and he realizes that this is the youth that entered his chamber earlier. Although he can't seem to recollect her designation, she silently ambles back to his counter to arrange his food and remedy. While he struggles to recall, abruptly, the status panel materializes with precisely the information he requires. It categorizes her as a low-tier adversary and exhibits detailed data about her statistics and her aptitudes. Her attributes are being frigid-hearted and diligent, but it's her talent that ensnares his gaze. She possesses a talent called the Spirit's Eternal Comrade. That's the paramount level talent in the spirit magic domain. He continues to stare at her statistics until she pivots to observe him and realizes that he has also been gazing at her. She nervously advises him to relish his repast before stepping back to permit him to eat. Kyle watches her intently and ponders why someone with the aptitude to become a genius spiritualist is toiling so arduously as a maid. Well, the solution to that transpired a year ago at an emporium. The auctioneer proudly presents today's unique article. As Kyle sits in the assembly acrimoniously, she directs the limelight at a young girl who stands mutely on stage. It's Ursel, and she's revealed to be the progeny of Baron Heelan, who was recently divested of his title because she descends from a noble lineage. She's courteous and astute, and the crowd is clearly captivated by her. Thanks to that, as soon as the offers commence, people begin to exclaim their valuations for the young girl. Sir Lanehart, who is situated beside Kyle, proposes that they depart the auction, since they should not condone things like human trafficking. Kyle, however, instead rises and submits a lofty bid of 300 gold. The sum is so preposterous that the auctioneer falters for a moment, as he hears that the knight beside him calls out to him in shock for even contemplating acquiring a thrall. But the young aristocrat silences him with a remark. He will expend his currency however he desires to. In his psyche, his actions don't signify, since his own progenitor doesn't even regard what he's doing. Then, with the assembly completely muted from his high tender, he ambles over to the girl, who gazes at him with a vacant mien on her face, while her hands are manacled. He informs her that from this point forward, she pertains to him now that he had procured Ursula. He escorted her externally and undid her fetters. With that, she was liberated to do whatever she wished. He emancipates her and tells her that she's no longer a chattel, now that he has purchased her liberty. Kyle pivots to depart with Sir Leon Hart by his flank, but the girl calls out to him once more. She deliberates it for a moment. Now that she possessed her autonomy, she could venture wherever she desired. But since he stated that he possesses her, she wishes to accompany him. Kyle scoffs and tells her do whatever she fancies. Back in the contemporary Hyunwoo, realizes that he has just received a glimpse into Kyle's recollections. With that, he comprehends how the young maid had entered the Marquis's domain. Ursula had been vended at an auction, and Kyle had acquired her in order to liberate her. She must have endured so much at such a tender age. Either way, the reality that he also possesses Kyle's memories indicates that he had completely amalgamated with him. He can even perceive the sentiments Kyle had toward Ursula at the time, a sensation of camaraderie from both of them, sharing a destiny that they didn't select, as well as their mutual sensations of being forsaken in the world alone. Those are what impelled Kyle to do what he did. And by her he resolves to cease mulling too much, so he can savor the nourishment before him. He takes the initial morsel, and his eyes scintillate in elation. The repast was delectable. He asks Ariel if she is the one who crafted this herself. The girl unsteadily responds that she was the one who had prepared the gruel. It seems like she's still diffident about it, especially since she knows how he can become when he's irate at something or someone. But to her astonishment, he instead lauds her on being a fine culinary and requests her to make the same fare for him again. Next occasion, Ursula is momentarily stunned by this and averts her gaze bashfully. A status panel unfurls above her cranium and displays that her fondness has risen to 35. Thanks to his commendation, even though she had a modicum of affection, considering the theatrical encounter they had antecedently. Her affection wasn't that elevated. It's not very astonishing, though, since she must have witnessed all of Kyle's wayward conduct. The fact that she had any fondness for him at all was a marvel in itself in the game he used to engage. There was no spirit summoner designated Ursula. That signifies that in the primary game narrative, she was never able to fully cultivate her capabilities as a spirit conjurer, and instead, wherein she forfeited her existence this occasion, he wasn't intending to permit that occur. There is no possibility he would permit such a jewel escape his grasp, particularly when she's directly before his very eyes. He resolves to commence laboring directly forth. He queries her if she has ever contemplated acquiring spirit invocation. She gazes upon him, bewildered concerning why he abruptly desires her to master such a skill. The youthful patrician states he wishes her to acquire it because he believes she possesses an aptitude for it. She, on her own part, has never envisioned herself as possessing any aptitude for spirit invocation. That's likely because she hasn't been acquainted with spirit invocation, even within her previous residence. Spirit invocation is acknowledged to be notably pricey to impart, and master so for a lesser aristocratic lineage. The expense of tutelage would be a colossal encumbrance for them. That merely signifies that he now must manage affairs with his own efforts. He informs her that she's commencing to master spirit invocation, and she possesses no alternative. In the end, she pertains to him. Ursula swallows a mouthful and averts her gaze diffidently. As an additional message, display materializes above her cranium, and her fondness elevates to 50%. Some days subsequently, Kyle departs his chamber and stands directly opposite Sir Leonhardt. They observe each other fixedly. Ere the silver-tressed patrician requests the cavalier to permit his passage, Sir Leonhardt refuses instantly, which merely further disquiets Kyle. He has been confined in that chamber for excessively long, and by no means. He was intending to remain in that chamber for his whole existence. Sir Leonhardt resolutely informs him that he may not depart until his sire bestows authorization, particularly following what transpired and the master's final utterances to him. Kyle halts for an instant, and his thoughts meander across all the contentions the master had with him. The entire justification the chamber confinement edicts were present was because they could no more endure his perpetual misbehavior. Yet the more duration he squanders here, the lesser duration he possesses to obtain the mana motes that are adrift about deeper inside the dwelling. Ever since he ascertained that he could clear the mana conduits by employing the mana spheres that materialize around his chamber, he has been assimilating all the motes that manifest in his chamber. Each day, albeit it wasn't adequate to clear the conduits immediately, mana has been amassing within his physique, akin to experience tallies in a diversion, and his physique progressively enhanced over duration. Yet it is far from adequate to remedy the Hermamu affliction. To acquire more, he required to depart his chamber and venture outside to gather more mana. The youthful patrician vows that he wants stray very far, and he'll just stroll in the woodland nearby so he can engage in activity. The term activity astonishes Sir Leonhardt, who has never perceived such a constructive rationale from Kyle. That makes Kyle somewhat vexed, but Sir Leonhardt persists, stating that he has been assigned as the noble's personal cavalier for years. But this was the initial occasion that he had ever heard him articulate something like that. It was at that juncture that Kyle comprehended just how much of a delinquent he had been. Up until then, he possessed absolutely no believability. Even with that, nevertheless, Leonhardt appeared to be some manner of unyielding barricade. This man was tasked to be Kyle's individual guardian, but initially he was a renowned figure in the game who was known to possess a large measure of both defense and offense. He's highly proficient and has great promise, which signifies he can be elevated up to the station of captain. However, most participants simply made him function as a bulwark in their parties. Furthermore, owing to his high allegiance and unbreakable confidence, he was one of the most favored comrade figures among participants. In the original diversion, He becomes a wandering cavalier after the collapse of the Marquis household, which permitted people to enlist him through occurrences. For now, though, since the second son's insurrection hadn't transpired yet, he was still in the Sultarian manor, functioning as Kyle's personal cavalier. It was such a squander to assign such a promising talent like him, with child-minding responsibility. Just what precisely were the Sultarian Knights undertaking? Why on the globe would they situate him in a dead-end position like this? He inadvertently voiced that last portion aloud, and Leon Hart takes umbrage after misconstruing his utterances. As the delinquent is discontented with him as a guardian, the younger lad attempts to clarify that he's not dissatisfied with him. But Leon Hart, instead, just counsels him to adhere to the directives of the Lord. His sire, that's when Kyle realizes that the knight's allegiances don't reside with him. They reside with Lord Remton Sultarian, his sire that was only to be expected. After all, who would desire to associate with the wayward younger son? He just can't accept that. Though his next talent recruitment endeavor commences with Sir Leon Hart, he queries the cavalier if he would be amenable to attempt to persuade his sire. The flaxen-haired man realizes that something has altered about Kyle's demeanor. Little does he perceive that in actuality, he has captured the fascination of the younger lord, and now the youth is resolved to win his allegiance. He presses a bit more firmly and asks if the cavalier will assist him. Leon Hart isn't persuaded, however. There's something distinct about him somehow, but he just can't pinpoint precisely what it is. He asks Kyle what he's contriving by behaving so differently. That demonstrates just how much he doesn't confide in the delinquent. The lad has just been in his chamber for so long that his perspectives have shifted. From this point forward, he has decided that he desires to live a prolonged existence. That astounds Leon Hart. Who knows precisely why someone like Kyle can't live a lengthy life? The silver-haired lad is someone who had to relinquish everything because of his incurable Hermimu affliction. Someone like him stating the desire to live a prolonged existence, especially when it's improbable that he will survive past 20. Was sorrowful to hear he didn't possess any magical aptitude, nor did he have any exceptional swordsmanship proficiencies. And by being the youngest, he also has no prospect of inheriting the family. Even with all this, Lord Rempton decided to keep him by the youth's side. The elder patrician once queried Leon Hart if there was any animosity for that resolution that practically impeded his career. He immediately retorted that it would be an honor beyond articulation for someone in the Sultarian Knight Order to safeguard a direct scion of the Marquis family. He intends to discharge his obligations faithfully as a man of loyalty. It's precisely because he was such a devoted man that Lord Rempton desires him by Kyle's side. In the Marca household, there is no one else that can be relied upon to protect him. No one except the dependable and loyal Leon Hart. With that, the elder lord entrusts him to attend to the son of the house. The cavalier plans to obey that directive till demise, even as the youth now importunes him for a chance to venture outside. An exercise, he continues to ask if he can go out, and even suggest that the blonde cavalier inform the lord that he just desires to exercise. Leon Hart places down a resolute hand to halt him from moving anymore. He doesn't require to go outside to exercise, especially since he can exercise indoors as well. With no other alternative, Kyle decides to attempt a more forceful approach. He cautions Leon Hart to move aside and not to make him reiterate himself. All he needed to do was venture outside and locate some more mana nuclei so he could continue working on clearing his mana conduits. He gave Leon Hart a solemn gaze, and Leon Hart perceived a peculiar aura emanating from it. Once more, he kept on getting this impression that something genuinely was distinct about Lord Kyle. But even so, he had to maintain his position here. Regardless how much the young lord had altered overnight, he took a stride forward and stood more confidently before the lad. The Marquis's directive is unassailable, and this pertains to the young lord as well. However, if he genuinely desired to go outside, then he would have to surpass him initially. All of a sudden, Kyle felt a weighty, lethal intent flowing from the cavalier. It wasn't equitable for Lanehart to employ lethal intent on a youth over just a request to step outside. If he were a commonplace 13-year-old, he might have wet himself in terror and collapsed on the spot. Fortunately for him, he was not a commonplace 13-year-old. He smirked despite the overwhelming aura emanating from the cavalier and calmly ambled past him and tapped him on the shoulder. This astounded Leon Hart, who stood motionless as the youth walked past him, which signified that he had to keep his promise. They ventured out into the tranquil night. And the initial thing that Kyle observes is how invigorating the air felt. It had been a prolonged duration since he was last outdoors, and he took a moment to extend and feel the air on his skin. Even though the garden was not too distant from home, he still felt a sensation of liberty as he gazed at the splendid night firmament. And more than anything, he was exhilarated by the quantity of Mona particles flowing everywhere. Now that he had the opportunity, he was going to consume them all. The young lord scurries around the garden, attempting to gather as many manicures as he can, while Leonhard observes. From the knight's viewpoint, he was scampering around like a youth in a play area, and it reminded him of the reality that Lord Kyle was still a youngster. At the close of the day, he didn't anticipate the young lord to be so joyous just by going outside, but still a youth. Being capable to work past him while he was employing his lethal intent should have been unachievable, especially since Lord Kyle hasn't trained in mana or aura, so he shouldn't be able to manage that kind of duress. Leonhart remains deep in contemplation and doesn't observe Kyle. Glancing at him, it's apparent that he's still unsettled from what transpired, and he has every justification to be astounded. The reason Kyle could endure Leonhart's lethal intent was elementary. He may physically be a 13-year-old patrician lad who has never been in a conflict, but mentally, he's a veteran who has survived innumerable virtual conflagrations. For 10 years, in a virtual reality diversion, Fantasy Defense was renowned for its lifelike portrayals through virtual reality, and owing to his vast reservoir of experience, he had become desensitized to these life or death junctures, especially since he had already witnessed some dreadful sights while wading through mounds of corpses and being drenched in ichor. A little intimidation tactic, like lethal intent, was too simple for him to overcome. After everything he's been through, after a little more mana accumulation, he had obtained enough to be able to clear some more mana channels. Venturing outside was definitely the correct decision. Leonhart informs the young lord that he will be requesting reprimand from the Marquis's order for his actions, even though he was only adhering to directives. It was still improper of him to use on someone. He was meant to safeguard and serve. Then he bows his head and apologizes to Kyle for the superfluous use of a potent skill on him. Kyle glanced at Leonhart, then told him to convey his words along to his sire, that Kyle does not wish for Leonhart to be chastised. The elder lord is astounded when he hears that his son. Kyle actually stated that he didn't desire his subordinate to be reprimanded. He inquires once more to ensure that Kyle was the one that relayed this message to him. Kyle just didn't seem like the type of individual to do something like that for anyone. He also mentioned that Kyle managed to confront his lethal intent skill, which no typical 13-year-old should be capable to do. In fact, Leonhart doubted what he was observing as well. For Kyle to have withstood the lethal intent of an expert cavalier like him, he must have acquired great proficiency out of thin air. The elder lord then asks what Kyle later did while in the garden. After scampering around the garden for a period, he relaxed and contemplated. Leonhart watched him in astonishment while he meditated in the garden. He asked the younger lord when he mastered how to meditate. When Kyle was younger, he briefly learned swordsmanship from his sire. At the time, he also mastered how to meditate, but he didn't possess the aptitude for it. So he relinquished quickly, so he wanted to try his hand at it anew. And to do that, he requested Leonhart to keep everyone away from the vicinity, so he doesn't get sidetracked. After that, he meditated at that location for a whole 6 hours. The elder lord halted the narrative in surprise at the thought that Kyle could even meditate for that duration. He meditated for a whole 6 hours, not 6 seconds that youth might have transformed. After all, the Duke had once attempted to instruct Kyle the fundamentals of swordsmanship. When he was young, he was a scion of the Celtarian family. After all, so he should at least be able to tread the path of swordsmanship. He also hoped that the white-haired youth would inherit the proficiencies of the family's hallowed techniques. However, that youth couldn't accomplish anything. He knelt after just a little bit of training and lamented that his legs felt like they were going to seize up. That made the Duke irate at the fact that such a feeble individual could be part of his family. There has never been a weaker scion in his lineage. Kyle had no aptitude for swordsmanship whatsoever. On top of that, he lacked tenacity and forbearance, and he couldn't even endure simple drilling. So to hear that someone like that actually meditated for 6 hours is incredible. Could it be that something had struck his cranium and altered his disposition? Leonhart already considered that. and he checked to see if there was anything amiss with his sustenance. Fortunately, there was nothing peculiar, and Kyle's sudden transformation was entirely on his own. His disposition had completely changed recently, and it's not just his attitude towards arduous labor that had changed. Even the way he regarded Leon Hart had clearly altered as well. It seems like he has finally started to develop a bit, and that is something that fascinates the Duke. He decides to let it go without more deliberation and tasks Leon Hart to continue attending to Kyle. Back in his chamber, Kyle continues to channel his mana until his spiritual perception is augmented and his mana starts overflowing. Owing to that, his eyes can now accurately assess the condition of his own physique. With that, he should be able to clear the mana conduits all the way to his core. In one attempt, he starts in his arm. Then he draws the mana into his shoulder, down to his spinal column, and then finally all the way to his core. He endures the discomfort as his core frees up. But after a moment, he unblocked his mana conduits and cleared a passage to his core. Now that he has accomplished that, he should be able to utilize magic. And he's eager to commence learning sorcery in earnest. In this realm, to employ magic, a mage has to form a sigil near their core. To master higher tier magic, then they must augment the number of sigils they possess, and the more sigils they aspire to create, the longer it will require. So, if an individual hoped to become a mage, they would have to commence training between the ages of 5 and 8. Then by the age of 12, they should be able to form at least one sigil, to be regarded as an individual with the potential to become a mage. Since Kyle is already 13 years old, it's a bit belated for him to commence learning sorcery. Fortunately for him, he wasn't a typical NPC who had to adhere to the simple regulations of their realm. Since he has the mana adaptation aptitude, then his situation is distinct from normal. All he needs to do is form a sigil, and he should be able to commence learning sorcery. But first he had to master how to form a sigil in the first place. Perhaps he could construct it the way he learned from the game. As he pondered on how he would undertake things, a rap came from his portal. It's Leon Hart, and he came to convey the tidings that the Duke has lifted the constraints on Kyle's movement. Now he's permitted to depart his chamber and take a stroll in the garden, under the stipulation that Leon Hart accompany him at all occasions. He still can't depart the estate, but being allowed to ambulate in the garden is already a boon. For someone who spends every day and night confined in his chamber, it seems that Leon Hart truly did a fine job persuading his sire. But it also seems like his favorability had augmented as well. It had increased by 30 points out of nowhere. Back when he repelled the lethal intent, his favorability was at -50. Perhaps he was moved by his meditation in the garden, especially since he meditated all through the night and collapsed in the morning. Leon Hart seems like the kind of individual who's impressed by exertion and perseverance either way. Now that his restrictions have been removed, there's a location he has been desiring to visit. The estate's repository is a place filled with all the erudition he would require to form his initial magic sigil. But the custodian doesn't look pleased to see him. In fact, she looks petrified. She hastens over to Leon Hart in a desperate endeavor to ascertain what's occurring. Kyle was barred from entering the repository a long time ago, after he had spent an entire day shredding some authentic, rare volumes that would cost a fortune to replace. He used to jest that they were just sheets of paper that were valueless. After you perish, even though she struggled to obtain them. After journeying across the empire, after his outbursts in the repository, he was banned from ever stepping foot in there. But it seems like his constraints have been lifted. Kyle himself is abashed that he used to do such foolish things. But now he only came to the repository to peruse, not to cause disturbance. He specifically desires volumes related to sorcery. That perplexes the custodian, since the Duke's family always prioritized swordsmanship, so there weren't numerous volumes on magic. For now, all he desires is a volume that instructs how to form magic sigils. She brings him an introductory tome that seems far too intricate for his preference. There were volumes created for 7-year-olds, but each one felt like a university dissertation. Typically, if this was some sort of game, then it would be a status panel that would permit him to automatically master everything. In each volume, as if on prompt, a status panel materializes before him and apprises him that he has unsealed an ability designated spiritual insight. It allows him to interpret the low-tier volume that he was struggling to read, and then convert it into simpler renditions that he can peruse quickly. On top of the interpretation feature, He can also utilize his keen perception skill to decipher volumes. Effortlessly and swiftly he asks Alice, the custodian, for more beginner volumes. And he's eager to acquire as much erudition as he can. Lionheart wonders if it is truly acceptable to have these many volumes borrowed out at once. The custodian was genuinely concerned that he would mar some, because of the sheer quantity that he borrowed. Even selling her dwelling wouldn't be adequate to replace them if they were misplaced or marred. She didn't need to fret so much about it, though, since he planned to conclude them swiftly. Or at least he would lose fascination in the midway. Typically, Kyle detested volumes, but now he's eagerly perusing as many as he can all at once. Lionheart observes that the volumes he selected were mainly volumes on mana, regulation, and magic, sigil creation. He quickly deduced that this must be related to his malady. He attempts to offer a little bit of counsel to the young patrician about how learning sorcery will be arduous, since her mom obstructs the mana and aura flow of his physique. But Kyle already knows what he's attempting to convey before he even commences speaking. Lionheart offers to withdraw if his counsel is unwelcome. But that's the contrary of what Kyle is contemplating. It's a valid observation after all, so there's no necessity to get vexed about it. Everyone in the household would probably state the same thing and perceive what he's doing as a squandering of time. But he's the outcast of the family, after all, and he already has a standing as the reckless youngest son. A little bit of peculiarity from him wouldn't astonish anyone. Besides, it's not like perusing volumes harms anyone. At the close of the day, he's certain Lionheart is just concerned that he will falter at learning sorcery and then descend into a profound desolation. But that's quite the contrary. Kyle has no intention of perishing young. He stands up and ambles towards the elder man, then places a clenched fist on his chest to reassure him. He's planning to do everything he can to ensure that he survives longer than anyone believes he can. With that, he departs to find a more comfortable place to recline and conclude his volume. Lionheart is left stunned at Kyle's abrupt personality transformation. The Kyle Saltarian he recalled wasn't this. Resolute in the slightest. One of his earliest recollections with the youth was a day in the training grounds, where he knelt down on the earth, weeping for his sire when Lionheart came to inquire what was amiss. He told him that the elder lord had stated that there was no necessity for a youth like him. He used to be such a winner once, and now it looked like he was developing into someone commendable. The blonde cavalier picks up a volume and heads towards the youth, and that's when Kyle observes that his affection score has gone from -30 back up to 0. He has no notion why that occurred so abruptly. There is nothing special that he did that should make it ascend. So suddenly, he's almost apprehensive as the elder man approaches him. But all he does is place a volume on the table before departing and offers to await outside his chamber. Before the elder man departed, there was the faintest indication of a smile on his visage. Kyle wonders if perhaps he just enjoyed seeing the younger lad peruse. But if that's the circumstance, then why didn't his affection level alter while they were in the repository? Well, he usually appreciates seeing persistence. So maybe perusing multiple volumes in one go counts as persistence, regardless of the rationale. Kyle simply attributed it to him being a peculiar fellow. All the while, Lionheart stood outside his chamber with a wistful smile on his visage now that the elder cavalier is gone and he's all alone. It's time for him to commence perusing. He activates his keen perception skill again and starts deciphering all the volumes he had borrowed from the repository. At once, as he anticipated of the skill, the deciphering velocity is dozens of times faster than his regular perusing speed. Not just that, but he can also decipher multiple volumes at once. So it was like he was perusing all of them at the same time. On top of that, any intricate portions of the deciphered content were broken down into simpler information. The erudition from the volume also gets stored in his cerebrum as information. The more volumes he peruses, the more erudition he acquires, which then accelerates the deciphering process even further, which augments his comprehension. That then accelerates the deciphering process even further within a matter of moments. All the volumes in the vicinity had been deciphered. With that done, it's time to put his sorcery to the examination. The initial thing he desires to attempt is forming a sigil, utilizing the deciphered information thanks to the deciphered erudition. He already comprehends the basic tenets of sigil creation and the minimum prerequisites to form an initial sigil. First, he has to guide the mana along a golden trajectory, so he will be able to form a sigil. He sits down and prepares to commence forming the sigil. And with a little bit of focus, the mana begins to move along the trajectory. Immediately, it starts to feel like his chest is searing near his core, but he has to endure. Otherwise, the mana will flow backward and mar his organs. He struggles with it, and after a lengthy, agonizing procedure, he manages to form the initial sigil. Owing to this, his blocked conduit trait has been diminished. This signifies that his mana has become more vigorous, and he was one stride nearer to conquering his fatal malady. He can now gather refined mana within the sigil, and with that he should be able to utilize sorcery appropriately. However, he had spent the entire night perusing and attempting to form that sigil. So as soon as he stood up in jubilation, he collapsed in weariness into slumberware. If Leonhardt and Ursiel were going to chide him for napping on the floorboards. Later in the forenoon, Ursiel enters his chamber to deliver his breakfast and discovers him unconscious on the floor. She hastens to his side to attempt and rouse him up. She was perplexed about why he was unresponsive and what all these volumes were doing in his chamber, despite the immense toll that the procedure was exacting on his physique. It's remarkable that he had contrived to successfully form the initial sigil. In just a solitary night from this point forward, a new existence as the mage Kyle Seltarian was commenced. Meanwhile, Leonhardt restored the volumes to the custodian, who appeared like she was on the brink of erupting from tension. A delectable-looking platter of sustenance sits in the scullery, while RCL applies the final embellishments on the last item. After considerable arduous labor, her repast is finally complete. She blushes while recollecting the commendations Lord Kyle bestows her whenever she cooks proficiently for him. The notion of receiving more commendations from him makes her beam, and she grasps the platter to go convey it to him. On her way out of the scullery, the maids that once tormented her approach to obstruct the egress to the kitchen. They observe the sustenance on the platter and know that it's meant to be for the younger lord. They gaze down at her disdainfully and inform her that she should go and repose instead of delivering the sustenance. This occasion they desire to deliver the sustenance to him individually, since they've observed that his disposition has been considerably better recently. Besides, serving Lord Kyle wasn't her obligation once before, so she can restore her station to its rightful possessor now and revert to their original understanding. Herseal declines their proposition. If they have any grievances about her labor, or they desire to alter it, then they can just converse with Lord Kyle themselves. With that, she ambles past them while they call out for her to halt. But she disregards their summons and collides into a cerulean trest maid at the portal. This one only regards her with a bewildered mien, while the other maid continues to vociferate at her. They exchange a glance for a moment before she exits the scullery to serve Lord Kyle. As she departs, the flaxen-haired maid sends a malicious look in her direction, but doesn't utter a syllable. She delivers the breakfast to Kyle, who partakes into it enthusiastically, while she observes over him with a smile. She attempted adapting the recipe to fit what he had instructed her, and it seems like it suits his palate. Her culinary skill just gets better and better with each succeeding day. Because of him, she's been practicing diligently every day, and she even acquired some new recipes from the head culinarian. She genuinely was assiduous and industrious, and he esteemed her for that. But his thoughts on her were elsewhere. He queries her how she's advancing with her spirit sorcery. She freezes as he mentions it and doesn't immediately respond. So he asks her to bring her introduction to the spirit magic volume that he had given her once before. She has perused about midway through the volume thus far, and judging by the tattered pages, she has also been studying it assiduously, since she's from a patrician lineage. That also signifies that she has rudimentary education, and her learning velocity isn't sluggish. However, he's not content with her present pace. They don't possess the duration to take it leisurely. He requires her to learn more and become mightier. In 2 moons, the Seltarian family will conduct the heir succession rite. On that day, the second scion, Adolf, will spearhead a coup assisted by dark apparitions, and the Marquis family will collapse. Everyone in the villa at the time will be ensnared in the pandemonium, and Ursi as well will be caught in the center where she'll forfeit her existence. To avert that transpiring, she must become mightier. To grant her more duration for studying, he decides that she will be relieved of cooking obligations for a period. For now, he will just have one of the other maids assume serving it, so she wouldn't have to fret about it. Arciel immediately declines his proposal and clenches her attire, as tears well in her eyes. she vows to labor harder, so she can continue studying spirit sorcery while still cooking for him. That way she won't be neglecting either of them. While still weeping, she implores him not to let anyone else serve him, so she can continue being by his side. Her weeping visage touches Kyle's core. It seems like she wasn't considering her sentiments at all. Her family had crumbled in an instant, and she went from being the progeny of a baronet to a thrall, then finally to a maid. She even lost contact with her kin, and has no notion if they are alive or deceased. Because of that, it makes sense that she would be profoundly insecure about her existence as a maid, especially since she is only just a climate. Thus far, she has only been able to live a somewhat stable existence, owing to his assistance. And now he desires to alter all of that for seemingly no rationale. It makes sense that he would be bewildered by all this. She must have believed that if she couldn't discharge her obligations as a maid appropriately, then she would be barred from the manor. That must be what she's contemplating, since he never elucidated the circumstances properly. Now that he has taken the duration to consider her sentiments, he decides to fully elucidate the circumstances to her. First, he reminds her of what he told her when they initially met. And he brought her here. He told her that she pertained to him, and he never forsakes one of his people. That signifies he will always safeguard them. The young maid is taken aback by his utterances, but he persists going, elucidating his rationale for asking her to learn spirit sorcery as well. She's an exceptional maid with incredible culinary proficiencies and an assiduous and meticulous work ethic. If she were to continue laboring hard like this, then she would surely be elevated to head maid. However, there are numerous other maids in the manor besides her, which signifies that there are numerous people who can supersede her. At any time, her visage changes to an expression of dread, and she attempts to plead with him again. But he interrupts her by placing a hand on her shoulder. Then he queries her what would transpire if she were to become a spirit mage. Spirit mages were uncommon and esteemed mages, which signifies that if she becomes one, she's destined to become a great individual in the future. Everyone will look up to her, and she will become the greatest spirit mage that ever existed. Her mind begins to fantasize about escapades they could have with her as a spirit mage and Lord Kyle by her side. By then there would be no one in the realm who could supersede her, and she would be with him for as long as conceivable. She still seems insecure about whether she can accomplish it at all, but Kyle reassures her that she can readily become the greatest spirit mage, with his confidence as her impetus. She takes the volume from his hand and concurs to become a spirit mage, just as he desires at the same juncture. Her fondness for him ascends by 10 points, and she pledges to confide in his judgment on her. After that, he officially designated Ursi as his personal maid, which granted her a stylish bow. From there, she began to manage his personal affairs, and he also relocated her out of the shared maid quarters into her own private chamber. That way she'll be able to study, and she won't have to fret about clashing with the other maids. She seems more exhilarated by the fact that this chamber is proximate to his chamber than for the added security, though he hopes that with this, they will be able to collaborate and grow mighty together. After a while, she settles into her new chamber, filled with volumes for her to peruse. While looking through her vast bookshelf, one day she observes Kyle and Leon Hart ambulating through the courtyard. Kyle observes her looking at him through the casement and sends her a wave and a smile. She chuckles and leans against the casement while watching him pass by, while her affection augments to 65. Meanwhile, reports of Kyle's transformation in demeanor reach an unforeseen individual. It seems that tidings of Kyle's transformation has reached numerous people. Recently, they've observed that he has been exercising considerably more frequently and building his might. On top of that, he doesn't snap at people as often, and he has recently been dedicating a considerable amount of his time to studying sorcery. It seems like somehow his disposition has augmented greatly, and he has finally matured somehow. It seems like it was finally time for Adolf Salterian to pay a visit to his once injudicious younger sibling. Ursel waves back at Kyle as he passes by. He pivots to Leon Hart and asks him to prepare a vast, open expanse that's distant away from the sight of other people. There's something he desires to experiment with in that expanse. He's hoping to attempt a sorcery experiment. His mind goes to a location in the outermost part of the estate where no one is likely to perceive them. The location is encircled by a dense forest of trees, which makes it arduous to perceive anything from the exterior. That makes it ideal for the experience. The young patrician plans to practice. He instructs Leon Hart not to permit anyone get proximate to them. Then he stands in the center of the field and prepares himself to unleash a spell. Leon Hart observes him from afar with a bit of skepticism in his mind. Lord Kyle has never been able to utilize sorcery or practice swordsmanship, owing to his herm, Mom Affliction. Perusing a few sorcery volumes over a couple of days isn't going to alter that reality. However, the present Kyle might possess a way to break free of those constraints somehow. The silver-tressed patrician prepares a sphere of sorcery in his palm, then dispatches it out as a magic projectile toward a tree. The spell detonates in a luminous light and immediately annihilates the tree on impact. Leon Hart, and even Kyle himself, are astonished by just how potent the spell was. The tree slowly topples over to the side as the two of them observe. While astounded at the output of power he just displayed, Kyle immediately pivots to Leon Hart and queries if he believes the sound reached the manor. Thankfully, the knight contrived to utilize his aura to suppress the detonation. That signifies that they wouldn't have heard the sound of the falling tree, as well as swift reflexes contrived to rescue both of them from some very uncomfortable inquiries. While that is definitely agreeable for both of them, there's a larger query left to be addressed. When and how did Lord Kyle form a magic sigil? Kyle responds that he formed it not too long ago, after adhering to instructions that the volume from the repository stated. Somehow with those techniques, he contrived to tap into his obstructed mana, since he had successfully cast sorcery and formed a magic sigil. That signifies that he had now surmounted his Hermimum affliction. To show more substantiation, he summons a magic sphere in his hand and displays it proudly to Leon Hart. At that juncture, the vows that the young lord made flashed through his psyche. He stated that he would do everything he could to remedy his malady, and he had no intention of perishing young. Somehow he had actually contrived to accomplish it. Leon Hart had perceived something distinct about the silver-tressed delinquent once before, but he had no notion that this was it. He warmly felicitates Kyle on his achievement, and his affinity augments by 10, since he has started esteeming the youth. That's to be anticipated from a man of perseverance. He is readily impressed by people who attain things. Based on their arduous labor, however, there were still several inquiries to be made, like the fact that he had only formed the initial sigil, and the power he just displayed is definitely more than a simple initial sigil spell. The potency of a first sigil spell is usually just about the same might as a punch from an adult human male. But the blast he dispatched out had the potency of a fourth sigil spell, which is way more advanced than any spell a novice should be able to cast. Despite that, though, he's still a first-tier mage, which makes his ability to cast such potent spells even more incredible. Could it be that Lord Kyle is actually some sort of wunderkind? No matter how you regard it, though, this power is just way too conspicuous, owing to his mind's faculty. He was able to peruse all the initial sigil sorcery volumes in the repository. If it weren't for that skill, it would have required months to successfully form a sigil. The skill also deciphers that sorcery is utilized differently from how he recalls. In the game, according to the sorcery volumes, he had to inscribe a complex magic sigil to be able to utilize sorcery. Then, after going through a multitude of intricate equations and computations, he then had to activate the sigil by circulating the mana. The procedure is longer and much more antiquated than what he recalled from the game. In the game, all he had to do was inscribe a simple magic emblem with mana, and then it would activate halfway. This method was way simpler to utilize and a lot more potent than the intricate methods he had to master. On top of that, he had also mastered all the magic emblems in the game over the prolonged duration of time he played. Since the methods were way too complex for his preference, he decided to utilize sorcery in a more user-amicable way, like he did in the game. But the end outcome is way more potent than he believed it would be. If anyone discovered about just how mighty he was with these techniques, then that would be a predicament. It's not time to unveil his full might yet, and it'd be better if he kept it secret. He asks Leon Hart to keep what he observed today a secret, even from the head of the family. Leon Hart is bewildered about why he would desire that, causing Kyle to attempt and persuade him by making an endearing visage. That only makes the knight's affinity plummet instead. So instead, he decides to tell Leon Hart The rationale: he desires to keep the might of his powers a secret. It's because of the succession right in 2 moons. It's a very crucial tradition in the marquee Alterian family that selects the next successor. The successor is not chosen by seniority, but through a contest. All their attributes are judged at once, including their disposition, sagacity, public endorsement, and other elements. All these things are utilized to determine who is the most promising heir to lead the family to greater affluence. Because of his promising disposition, his primary supporters were the family's long-serving retainers. Right now, there are 2 main individuals vying for this station: the eldest scion, Abel Celtarian, and the second scion, Adolf Elterian. These 2 figures were incredibly crucial to the narrative. Abel Celtarian is the scion of the legitimate spouse of the Marquis of Celtarian, and he was also the most probable candidate for heir. He has a gentle temperament and excellent swordsmanship proficiencies, and on top of that, he's been groomed as the heir since infancy, and he grew up with high anticipations as a model elite. Then there's the second scion, Adolf Celtarian, who was also born from a legitimate spouse. He was overshadowed by his elder sibling, Abel, and that signified he was overlooked for numerous years. However, at some juncture during his development, Adolf's disposition became more composed, and his swordsmanship proficiencies improved swiftly, which caused him to stand out among the assembly. That signified that Adolf's supporters were young and fervent cavaliers. He almost had the aura of a gang chieftain. And these 2 overwhelming personalities clashed in a corridor. Back at the manor, as soon as they encountered each other, Adolf sent a lethal glare in his elder sibling's direction. Abel, on the contrary, doesn't seem like he's bothered at all. He greets his younger sibling courteously, especially since it's been a prolonged duration since they've seen each other. In fact, he was so lost in contemplation that he didn't even observe the younger man approaching. At least that's what he states. But for someone who manifested his aura at just 5 years old, it was unachievable to believe that he wouldn't be able to sense someone's presence. That was just a narrative from eons ago. And even if Abel calls it a fluke, that isn't worthy of boasting about. It's still so much superior than his sibling, who couldn't manifest his aura until he was 15 years old. The elder men accompanying Abel, just that the younger sibling might just be sluggish and lacking aptitude. And of course, some people just tend to commence sluggishly. After all, the casual affronts are adequate to cause Adolf's subordinates to confront the elder men in ire, but he directs them to halt. They were in the main house right now, and behaving recklessly could negatively impact him. It seems like he trained his adherents well, and Abel condescendingly suggests that he might truly be worthy of being a candidate and the heir of the household. Adolf only scoffs at the supercilious attitude of his elder sibling. As far as he's concerned, Abel won't have any rationale to chuckle much longer. With that, he directs his subordinates to continue down the corridor, and they ambulate off, while Abel observes them depart with a skeptical glare. Later on, Kyle convenes a meeting with Leonhardt and Ursel in his bedchamber. It's about the succession rite, which is scheduled to be held in 2 moons. The rite doesn't regard those born by legitimate or illegitimate, means all they are about is their might. And that signifies that any direct scion of the lord of the household is eligible to vie for the station of heir. Well, at least in theory. In actuality, there were exceptions to the regulation, and the youngest scion just happened to be one of them. Owing to Kyle's malady, he was excluded from his contest by default. The 3rd scion, Duke, was also not involved in the contest, not just because he is too young, but also because in terms of his proficiencies in sword fighting and sorcery, there is no parallel between him and the remainder of their siblings. Therefore, the most probable candidates for the station were his 2 eldest siblings. Neither of them would appreciate any random surprises appearing at this phase of the game, especially since they were so proximate to the succession rite. So imagine what would transpire if it became known that Kyle has abruptly developed a mighty power. At a time like this, he was once regarded as a fool, who wasn't even worthy of being in their sights. Now he abruptly looks like he's about to ascend as a dark horse. There are only 2 conceivable reactions to this tidings. They would either attempt to persuade him to ally with them, or they would pursue his cranium. It seems like a drastic train of thought initially, but history has always been full of bloodshed for the station of heir, so it's not the craziest notion. According to the game setting, Abel is a fundamentally benevolent individual, meaning there was a low probability that he would take the more drastic of the 2 options. Adolf, on the contrary, is almost guaranteed to attempt and behead his younger sibling. That fellow is already set on slaying his whole family from the beginning. So there's no way the elder sibling won't attempt to assail him if he ever discovers that he has mastered potent sorcery. Because of that, the only option he has is to surmount his hermimum and become mightier. He may have a promising future, but as the youngest first sigil mage, it was fine to either bring him in as an ally or to endure no major, even if they didn't. Now that he has a more detailed comprehension of the circumstances, he decides to confide in Kyle's judgment and keep his powers a secret for now, but as soon as the succession rite is over, he will report this matter to the head of the family. Kyle's secrecy seems to be diminishing his affinity with the Cavalier, but there's nothing else he can do in this situation right now. Leon Hart is loyal to his sire, so he can't anticipate the Cavalier to abruptly side with him. It's not unachievable though. And this is already a superior scenario than before. Even so, he's already certain that he can make the elder man follow him, one way or the other. His unchecked desire is so potent that Leon Hart can perceive it. The Cavalier pivots back to face Kyle and queries if he is truly serious about becoming a mage. The Marquisate of Caltarian is known for their swordsmanship, but it would also be advantageous if he became a helpful mage. The notion of the fact that Kyle will soon make positive contributions to the family makes Leon Hart smile, and his affinity burgeons by a large measure. Kyle is astounded that it grew out of nowhere, and he has no notion how that even transpired. Could it be because they all ate together in his chamber? That's why the knight was commending Ursula on her culinary skill right after they had their conversation. So in hopes of continuing to augment their affinity, Kyle suggests that they eat together in his chamber from now on. Leon Hart isn't as thrilled with the notion and suggests that they just eat at the knight's quarters instead. But Ursula is secretly joyous about the abrupt request. Later on in the night, Kyle sits on the ground in his chamber, studying the magic emblems he knew from the game previously. These emblems permitted him to activate his sorcery as swiftly as possible, with a huge measure of power as well. But in this realm, he's not able to control how potent his spells are. It's already arduous to manage as it is. But now he'll have to figure out how to manage it before he can utilize his sorcery in public. For now, though, he decides to disregard all that and just attempt to seal the emblems up for now. There will be an opportunity to display his sorcery eventually, but to avoid drawing attention, he will have to utilize basic sorcery for now. The sorcery activation in this realm is sluggish and arduous to master, but it allows more precise control. Then he gets a notion since the sorcery activation method permitted him to control his sorcery output, and the emblem activation method permitted him to cast more potent spells in a shorter duration. Then he should be able to amalgamate the two and get the benefits of both. He attempts to amalgamate them, and the system immediately gives him a caution of a high peril of magical detonation. From what he's about to do, the message display abruptly appearing startled him enough that he leaps back in shock. But it seems like the amalgamation is actually conceivable. The system queries him if he's certain that he desires to proceed with it. Despite the perils, however, high perils usually signify that he'll get high rewards from it, and he's not going to get anywhere without taking any perils. With that in psyche, he starts the procedure of mixing the two activation methods, while the status panel continues to caution him of a peril of magical detonation. Then it queries him one more time if he desires to proceed with it, and he concurs to it excitedly. Then the system starts scrutinizing his physique and his experiences to see if he has the faculty to amalgamate the two activation methods. Once the scrutiny is done, the two spells amalgamate, and he's able to create a new form of sorcery by amalgamating both his spell casting techniques into one. With that done, he attempts to continue playing around with the spell to see how efficient he can make the spell, until his chamber starts to crackle with electricity, and he realizes a little too late that something is amiss. Ursula ambles outside with a pile of linens in her hands. She abruptly hears a large detonation coming from Kyle's chamber and hastens to see what's occurring inside his chamber. She finds Kyle sitting on the floorboards, surrounded by soil and pebbles, while there's a colossal aperture in the wall. His sorcery practice hadn't gone as he had planned, and he ended up demolishing his chamber. He should have probably practiced outside instead, once he perceived the caution message. But next time, help establish better prerequisites for his future experiments. As they're conversing, Leonhardt runs into the chamber to check out the noise, and also starts fretting about the wall. He asks them to at least assist him clean the chamber up first. A short while later, we discover Ursula in the scullery, attempting to concoct something delectable for our lad Kyle. But judging by the expression on her visage, matters aren't precisely proceeding seamlessly. She can't quite ascertain what's amiss. Her sustenance smells insipid, and she definitely doesn't desire to hear Kyle lament about how flavorless it is anew. As she's lost in contemplation, another maid ambles into the chamber. This one is Daisy, and she can't resist jesting Ursi about how solemn she always appears when she's cooking for Kyle each day, but Ursi doesn't even recoil. She just keeps her cranium down and states it's her duty. So of course she desires to do it with the utmost diligence. Daisy is somewhat astonished by how focused Ursi is and decides to offer a hand. She suggests incorporating a dash of nutmeg to the pottage and states ITLL enhance the flavor and make it much more robust. She even tells her to just try it and see if it dispels her uncertainties. Ursula appears somewhat hesitant, but eventually sprinkles some nutmeg into the pottage, gives it a swift taste, and is actually astounded at how much superior it tastes, with a look of charming inquisitiveness. She queries her senior if she's so proficient at cooking. Why not instruct her? Daisy smiles, though it's somewhat ominous looking, and concurs right away. She states she'd be delighted to assist if she can. But first matters first, Daisy suggests they transport the sustenance to Kyle. After loading up the conveyance, they wheel it to his chamber. As they ambulate, Daisy queries how Lord Kyle has been recently, mentioning she's heard he's become much more composed. She admits she was genuinely concerned when Ursel became his personal maid, fearing he might trouble or mistreat her. Ursi reassures her that Lord Kyle actually treats her very well. She mentions that she's heard he's become quite accountable lately, waking up early for exercise and studying a lot. Ursi is intrigued by how she is asking so many inquiries, but she eventually affirms that Kyle genuinely does labor hard at his studies. The scene then shifts to our lad, where Ursula shares to him how Daisy seemed very fascinated in him and asked a lot of inquiries, even about whom Kyle had been encountering lately. Our lad then queries her what precisely she told Daisy. Ursula replies that she didn't disclose much because she didn't desire to reveal anything about it. She queries if she did well, and our lad gives her thumbs up, acknowledging that she made the correct decision by not revealing anything to her. He also tells her that moving forward, it's okay to give more tempered answers. It will be arduous to keep it a secret that he surmounted his Hermima malady and commenced learning sorcery. As Ursula heads out, Kyle reflects on how his second eldest sibling has started to make his maneuver. As night descends at the manor, the Marquis's booming voice resonates out in disbelief. The head of the Sultarian family is stunned to learn that Kyle has genuinely surmounted his malady. The Cavalier affirms it again, stating it's indeed true. The youngest scion is now studying sorcery on his own and has apparently already attained the initial sigil. Though our lad's powers go way beyond the initial sigil, Leonhardt decides to keep this information to himself because such a revelation would be too much for the head of the family to manage. The Marquis remains skeptical, and he is finding this tidings too arduous to believe. The sire then recalls how Kyle was in dreadful condition the last time he perceived him throwing fits for no apparent rationale. At that time, he had to deal with it by giving Kyle a good strike to quiet him down. Momentarily, he then queries how old Kyle is now. The Cavalier reports that his 13th birthday has just passed. That is when the head reveals a pivotal detail, which is that to surmount Hermimum, you either require exceptional aptitude in sorcery or swordsmanship, aptitudes that usually manifest around ages 5 or 6. He wonders if there are any instances of someone surmounting Hermimum. As late as 13, the knight admits he's not certain of any such instances, but claims he has personally witnessed Kyle surmounting Hermimum and utilizing first sigil sorcery. On hearing this, the sire wonders if it could be a marvel. He then queries Leonhardt if he should meet his young scion personally. Leonhardt reminds him that it's his decision to make, but the head of the family somberly states he's not certain if he should meet Kyle, as he might still harbor animosity against his sire. But that's when the knight reveals the contrary to the Marquis. He explains that Kyle actually desires to converse with his sire, and if there's something the Marquis wishes to state, the knight offers to deliver the message. Hearing this, the sire decides he will meet Kyle in person. The scene flashes back to a moment earlier, when before meeting the head of the family, the cavalier had asked Kyle if he had any message for his sire. That's also when our lad, boldly stepping outside the manor's confines, ambles into the courtyard. The cavalier reminds him that he's still under house confinement and can't depart the annex without the Marquis's authorization. Kyle, with unwavering confidence, replies that this is precisely why he desires to meet his sire, face to face. The cavalier is startled for a moment by the boldness in his mien, and he hesitates to state anything. Kyle pleads with the cavalier, giving him an irresistibly endearing look. Eventually, the cavalier has no alternative but to concur to young master's scheme. In the present, when the sire hears that his scion doesn't resent him, he's left bereft of speech. The cavalier clears his throat theatrically and reiterates that Kyle desires to meet him. By the way, this man is esteemed Remton Celtarian, the head of the prestigious swordsmanship family, Marquis of the Celestrians, safeguards of the family from monsters for generations, and one of the 5 sword masters on the continent. He is, of course, Kyle's sire. When our lad observes a photo of the head of the family, his hand starts trembling uncontrollably. He realizes that it's the original Kyle's physique reacting, remembering the profound dread and animosity towards his sire. He recalls the harsh days the original possessor of this physique endured, the dread and apprehension still lingering in him, the constant reminder from his sire that he was a good, for-nothing scion had left him devastated. And those recollections now weigh on Kyle's soul. His sire never hesitated to remind him of his worthlessness. Letting out a sigh, our lad reflects on how the recent recollections of the original Kyle have now become his recollections too. Since Lee, Hyun-woo, and original Kyle's souls have amalgamated through possession, the duress and pain that the previous possessor once felt are now fully transmitted to him as well, but that's precisely why our lad intends to transform. He's resolved to show everyone that the Kyle of old, the scared broken lad, is gone as part of this physique now. He vows to prove Kyle's true worth to the realm and to himself. When he finally stands face to face with the Marquis, the man commences off the conversation by querying if he has something to state. Kyle responds with a crisp, loud voice stating, "Yes, Marquis." The Marquis remains silent for a moment, noticing how boldly his scion addresses him as Marquis instead of sire. It makes him wonder why this brat actually desires to meet him. He then points out that Kyle had been given clear instructions not to depart his chamber without authorization recently, though he acknowledges that Kyle was permitted access to the repository for study. So he cautions his scion that if he dares cause any more trouble, this time it won't conclude with just confinement. He queries Kyle if he comprehends what that signifies. Kyle begins to tremble instinctively at his sire's stern voice and can't help but feel the weight of the past. He points out that there's no confidence between him and his scion, though he admits it's understandable, given how much trouble the original possessor of his physique caused. He then gets inquisitive about his sire's might as one of the 5 sword masters. So he attempts to assess his stats utilizing his system. However, the system falters, unable to provide information on such a high-ranking adversary. Realizing he can't rely on the system information, he decides to parley instead. He calmly explains to his sire that the rationale he formally requested an interview through Leon Hart was precisely to avoid departing his chamber without authorization. The Marquis perks up, impressed by how efficiently his scion has countered him. He can't help but remark how Kyle is now speaking like an adult, just as the rumors suggested. Kyle then acknowledges his past conduct and admits he caused a lot of trouble and vexation with his puerile actions. He completely owns up to all the injudiciousness of the past, and with a deferential bow, he sincerely expresses his contrition. He vows to transform for the better. The sire is utterly baffled by the drastic transformation in his scion's conduct. How could a brat like Kyle even think of apologizing? He's astounded that a youth who used to blame others and get irritated every day is now stating something like this. While our lad decides to speak once again, His sire anxiously braces himself for what might come next. Kyle then drops a bombshell that he desires to make a pact with him. Inquisitive, the Marquis queries what kind of pact Kyle has in psyche. Our lad, first of all, reminds his sire that he must have already received a report from Leonhardt about him surmounting his Hermima malady. The sire affirms he has heard of it, but finds it arduous to believe such a miraculous thing could actually transpire. Kyle insists it's true to prove his point. He conjures fire in his hand, revealing to his sire that he now possesses first sigil sorcery abilities. The sire is completely blown away. Once again, he didn't genuinely believe Leonhardt's utterances, but seeing Kyle's sorcery abilities firsthand leaves him at a loss for words. He affirms he can perceive the mana flowing inside Kyle's physique. Our lad also claims that it's true, and that he'll only get mightier with time. Mages who surmount Hermimen are known for their exceptional promise. Kyle adds that it required him only a few days to reach the initial sigil through self-study, and a mage of this tier is said to be as valuable as an entire cavalier order. He acknowledges that the Sultarian family is renowned for its swordsmanship, but having top-tier sorcery among the direct science would be a great addition. He suggests that if the family supports his growth as a mage, he'll keep honing his proficiencies and contribute significantly. He hopes to become a great asset and help the Sultarian Marquis stand out with both swordsmanship and sorcery, elevating their family status in the nation. Kyle wraps up by querying his sire for his thoughts on the proposition. He reminds him that this is a pact that benefits both the family and himself, and requests that his sire consider investing in it as a capable talent. After putting his sire in a tight spot with his proposition, Kyle also reflects on life's give and take essence. He knows the best way to gain favor is to show what you can offer in reciprocation. The Sultarian family values its honor and benefit above all, and just showing family ichor won't persuade his sire. The previous Kyle attempted to gain attention through trouble, but those methods only backfired. But our lad is way wiser than the previous Kyle, and he comprehends that aligning mutual interests can bridge even the toughest relationships. Meanwhile, the sire is at a loss for words. He's left wondering if this is genuinely the same Kyle he knew, as he seems so distinct from the youth he once was. Kyle once again asked his dad to support him and help nurture his aptitude. Of course, this abrupt transformation in his science conduct has officially boggled his sire's psyche, and he's not even certain how to respond. He keeps wondering if this is genuinely the same youth he knew. The way Kyle speaks so efficiently and parleys so well was something his dad never anticipated from him. Attaining what you desire through parley and learning to utilize power and authority is a crucial skill for aristocratic youths. It's arduous to believe that the youth who used to throw fits is now stating things like this. The youth he once believed was a failure and had neglected has shown remarkable development. Eventually, he decides to acknowledge Kyle as a valuable asset to the Seltzer. On family, not surprisingly, the scion is momentarily startled when his sire concurs right away. The man then also vows he'll provide all the necessary resources and magic stones for his studies, and tells his scion to make sure he shows his worth. Kyle smiles in response and assures his dad that he'll live up to his anticipations. Some days later, we perceive the astonished visages of both Leonhardt and Rocio. Apparently, they're standing in a new sorcery workshop that Kyle has acquired to nurture his sorcery. He looks quite pleased and proudly queries for their opinions. He explains how he's reinforced the entire location with barrier sorcery, artifacts, equipped it with tools for making concoctions and artifacts. And he is also glad that there won't be any apertures in the walls. Now Leonhardt was the first to react, and he clearly looks fascinated by the fact that Kyle contrived to afford all this, given how pricey it must be. That's when our lad realized he had forgotten to mention that this was all financed by his dad. He explains that all he had to do was charm his sire a bit, and he gladly provided the resources. Leonhardt is somewhat creeped out by this, finding it arduous to believe that charms could actually work on someone like Remton Sultarian. Kyle then opens another subchamber in his workshop and invites RCL to take a look inside. She perceives even more equipment neatly arranged out on the shelves, but that is not the main feature here. Kyle explains that it's arduous to utilize spirit sorcery freely in the main chamber, so he made sure to set up a separate expanse for it. This new area is equipped with soundproofing and dustproofing, so she can practice spirit sorcery without any worries. Archie looks apprehensive as she glances around, because she is not certain if she actually merits this much. Kyle happily tells her that it's for her to utilize as much as she likes. He reminds her that he doesn't desire her to be just a maid, doing menial obligations, and he desires her to grow into an irreplaceable spirit mage that will become his trusted confidant. Not surprisingly, the girl bows her cranium, moved by how highly her master esteems her. She even starts to weep and vows to labor hard, learn diligently, and become someone who will be genuinely helpful to him. As she makes this vow, her favorability rating ascends to 70. Just as they're sharing this heartfelt moment, the stones on the shelves begin to react, and luminous energy starts illuminating the area. They look around and perceive that the spirit sorcery sigil is abruptly activated. On its own, Kyle queries her if she's done something, but she denies it. But it doesn't require him long to realize what's transpired. The cerulean energy starts to coalesce and transforms into a charming, fluffy creature with pinions that swiftly hastens toward RCL and hugs her tightly. Our lad affirms to us that what we just observed was a spirit invocation ritual, and that the charming fluffy sphere is a familiar, given that it immediately clung to RCL. It's clear she's the one who invoked the spirit. He's not too astonished, though, considering her aptitude for spirit sorcery. He commends her on her proficiencies, but RCL points out that she literally didn't genuinely do anything. Kyle, in response, explains that spirit sorcery is distinct from casting spells or reciting incantations. It involves perceiving the spirit's energy in nature and connecting with it through the soul. When her emotions were heightened, the spirit stones in his workshop responded and invoked the spirit for her. He then tells her to look at the shelves, where all the spirit stones that were previously there are now gone. Urchil is bewildered to perceive that it's true and feels somewhat uneasy about it, but the lad reassures her that it's fine, as they were meant to be utilized anyway. As the spirit clings to the girl, Kyle reflects on how he didn't anticipate her to invoke a spirit so swiftly. He's quite inquisitive about what kind of spirit this is. When he attempts to utilize his system to examine it, the system reveals that it's a high-ranking spirit and can't be identified with insight. He then directly queries her what kind of spirit it is. Urchil chats with a little furball and responds that the spirit is known as Ashirus, an ancient spirit of light. Kyle is astounded by the revelation, and he finds it arduous to believe that this portly little spirit is actually the legendary ancient spirit of Lightwell. It seems like he might have annoyed the spirit by calling it portly. Apparently, ancient spirits are so uncommon that even top-tier spirit mages might only contrive to invoke one after pouring all their spirit stones into the procedure and spending days and nights on it. The fact that RCL was able to invoke this spirit in one attempt is absolutely mind-boggling. What is more fascinating? That she was able to invoke the spirit unconsciously. Meanwhile, the spirit is still fuming about being called portly and starts pinching our lad relentlessly. RCL then swiftly explains that this isn't the spirit's true form, and if it reverts to its normal form, the entire manor might collapse. The bird finally stops pinching Kyle. Raciel then reveals that the spirit desires to be friends with her. Kyle swiftly realizes that the spirit must be suggesting they form a covenant, since it was invoked by Raciel. The girl then promptly queries the spirit if it's okay to form the covenant, and the fur ball chirps a positive response. A yellow light illuminates as the sigil activates, and RCL officially queries the spirit of light if it will form a covenant with her. After some formalities, it's time to bestow the spirit name. Kyle swiftly suggests the name Padaki, and Ursel concurs, bestowing the name upon the spirit. The system affirms that the spirit's name is now Padaki, and the registration is concluded. The little fur ball swiftly flies over to its master, and Ursel states that she looks forward to collaborating with Padaki. Starting today, the spirit chirps a positive response once again, as they share a moment of affection. Kyle reflects on how well his talent discovery endeavor is going. Some days pass, and we perceive our lad catching up with his elder sibling. Adolf, the big bro, commences off the conversation by apologizing, stating he did not give much attention to his little sibling lately, as his elder sibling Kyle remains modest and replies that it's nothing, as he should have sought out his sibling first. It's clear they're not just exchanging siblingly affection, as there's a thick tension between them. RTL serves tea to Adolf and swiftly ambles away. As she departs, Adolf observes her with a purposeful gaze and swiftly acknowledges her as the thrall Kyle had acquired from the market. He can't help but comment on how beautiful she looks for a mate. Our lad responds that his main intention was simply to get a mate. His sibling then queries if he can take Ariel with him. As soon as these foul utterances fall into Kyle's ears, he is unable to take another sip of his tea and remains silent, inwardly calling his sibling refuse. However, he keeps his composure and politely queries if there's no other youth he would prefer. Instead, he starts feigning as if he is romantically fascinated in RCL as well, because this is the only way he can avoid offending his malevolent sibling. Adolf takes the lure and swiftly dismisses the notion, claiming he's not the type to purloin a girl from his younger sibling. We then hear Adolf's thoughts as well. And the rationale he's avoiding taking the maid is clear, which is that he can't afford to make an adversary of his younger sibling, just yet by snatching away his girl. Besides, he's heard rumors that Kyle is not that troublemaker brat anymore, but seeing him with women at such a young age only affirms to Adolf that Kyle is likely heading down a dark path. For Adolf, this makes it even simpler to lead his sibling further into the shadows. Adolf then begins teasing him, stating that if he had known his young sibling was such an intriguing young man, he would have attempted to get closer sooner. He points out how much Kyle has improved, to which our lad simply concurs, mentioning that daily existence has no major issues. Now his her mum isn't fully recovered yet, but it's gradually getting better. Looks like the big bro was not anticipating to hear this, and he promptly queries if he is actually recovered. Kyle explains that it's a long-term malady, so it's arduous to remedy all at once, but it's improving step by step. He then shows his sibling some sorcery, telling him it's a spell he created. That's about 1.5 times more potent than regular sorcery. He queries Adolf what he believes about it. Well, the big bro is quite impressed to perceive that Kyle can create spells. As well, what astounds him is that Kyle is learning sorcery swiftly, even though he is not fully recovered from his malady. He begins to worry that our lad might become an impediment to the heir succession. He also can't help but to observe that Kyle's attitude has abruptly transformed, as if he's becoming a distinct individual. His magical proficiencies are growing day by day as well. He desires to be cautious, but at the end, he just believes of Kyle as a 12-year-old youth. So there is nothing to be so cautious about. He then decides to manipulate his junior sibling for his benefit, and if he becomes valueless, Adolf simply plans to discard him as refuse. So he directly queries Kyle if he might be fascinated in joining his faction. The invitation surprises Kyle, leaving him unsure of how to respond. A weighty silence descends as Adolf eagerly awaits for his reply. Kyle then smiles purposefully as if he's figured out his answer. Adolf decides to inform their sire about the circumstances, and Kyle thanks him for managing it. Afterwards, as Big Bro prepares to depart, he opens the portal with a creak, and Leonhardt, standing outside, hears the sound and promptly pays respects to Adolf. Adolf then recalls that Leonhardt is another impediment in his path. This cavalier isn't an easy adversary, as despite any enticements he hasn't switched sides. He then throws a jab at Leonhardt, remarking how it's quite a sight that the cavalier has been reduced to guarding a snot-nosed brat. With that, Adolf ambles away with his escort afterwards. The cavalier simply pivots around and enters the chamber, where he finds Kyle still relishing some refreshing tea. Our lad then happily informs his cavalier that sibling Adolf asked him to join the subjugation squadron. He further explains that his role will involve collaborating with Baron Jerome, a close confidant to Adolf's 5th Legion. This mission will likely serve as a test of allegiance to the siblings and presents an opportunity to earn merit and gain recognition for the family. Leonhardt is surprised by the tidings and swiftly states that if Kyle is joining the subjugation squadron, he desires to go as well. However, our lad turns him down, explaining that having a knight there would put sibling Adolf on guard, and he desires to earn his big sibling's confidence on his own, and can't have someone from their sire's side with him. Leonhardt points out that the mission is perilous, but Kyle explains that sibling Adolf won't easily confide in him. He'll desire to see how useful Kyle is in real combat, and might even deliberately expose him to peril. My guy then flicks his fingers, and fire begins burning in the palm of his hands. to shield his person, thus he's not overly anxious. He further states he will not unveil his complete capabilities throughout the assignment, and subsequently inquires of Leon Hart if he's previously known about ogre fragrances. Prior to us obtaining further information regarding that, the view shifts to the verdant rural area, in which troops have established an encampment within the forest. Seemingly, we are located in Tristan's southern region, area recognized for its beast-ridden woodland. The Celtran family frequently dispatches conquest teams to eliminate the creatures in that location, and predictably Kyle is a member of this unit. Within the encampment, a slender man with a mustache presents himself as Baron Jerome, the associate of our protagonist, and they're going to collaborate closely for this conquest operation. Our protagonist returns a smile to the gentleman and remarks that this is his initial experience in actual battle. Therefore, he anticipates collaborating with an individual who is seasoned. Like Baron, the individual responds in kind with the action and vows to shield it, irrespective of anything nevertheless. Although Baron seems encouraging on the exterior, our protagonist detects something amiss. The individual possesses an unfavorable rapport rating of 40, which is not a positive omen. It is uncertain what our protagonist could have previously done to displease him. However, he resolves to remain wary. Baron subsequently resolved to depart to get ready for the forthcoming duties. As our protagonist departs, Baron considers that Kyle is merely a circle sorcerer. Fresh and unseasoned, Baron resolves to keep him under careful observation, evaluating his abilities and guaranteeing his security. Ultimately, what issues could a youth recently confined to bed conceivably create? Following some time, we observe these diminutive imps are being vanquished through our protagonist's enchanting skill. The troops, observing from the periphery, cannot avoid lauding our protagonist for his remarkable talents. As he vanquishes goblins all around him, his rapport keeps steadily growing. With a swift flick of his digits, the remaining throng of imps is engulfed in flames. The warriors surrounding him applaud and acclaim his display, and Kyle could not resist reveling in the adulation. Baron lavishes him with commendation, proclaiming him truly extraordinary, and notes that this current conquest engagement was the most effortless they had ever faced. Precisely at that very instant, Baron's rapport surges from -40 to +50. Nearly at once, this surprising turn captivates Kyle, because he has never encountered anyone so simple to manage. The troops, on the other hand, continue their jubilant revelry now, and Baron is certain that brother Adolf will be delighted to learn of Kyle's accomplishments. This brings a grin to our protagonist's countenance, as his initial strategy has now been established, and it is presently the moment to proceed to Phase 2. As darkness descends, everyone reconvenes once more at the encampment for an alcohol-fueled festivity of their effortless, untroubled triumph. Kyle understates his own part, stating there is no reason to commend him. However, Baron persists in recognizing his extraordinary sorceress abilities. The remaining troops concur, conceding they at first misjudged their youthful master. They highlight his continuing youthfulness and tender age, and have been residing in the Grand House, causing them to assume he would find difficulty with both battle and bivouac. Their assumptions are entirely overturned, when not only does Kyle courageously partake in the conflict, but he also refrains from grumbling about the harsh bivouac circumstances. Indeed, he demonstrates himself to be quite mature for his years. Upon being questioned, our protagonist elaborates that because his own sibling Adolf must have confronted these trials during all creature conquests, he believed he ought to also behave courageously and adult-like, precisely like his elder sibling Adolf. All are profoundly touched by his very statements, and a few even become emotional at the idea of Kyle's esteem for brother Adolf. It appears our protagonist's plan succeeded flawlessly. The troops promptly consented to relay information to brother Adolf regarding the incredible display, and they are very keen to apprise Adolf about how much his young kinsman esteems him. The favorability also elevates up to 60, as everyone feels a warm admiration for him. As midnight nears and all the soldiers are soundly slumbering, Kyle resolves to take a swift survey around before retiring. The patrolling sentry requests him not to venture too far, and with that, our protagonist promptly departs. Kyle is actually delighted that these bunch of foolish individuals don't suspect him of anything, just because they perceive him as a youth. He also ponders how most of the warriors have succumbed to sleep. After celebrating their triumph throughout the night, there are a few sentinels still on watch, but they don't appear to be much of a menace at that juncture. He retrieves a vial of fragrance. It happens to be ogre essence, which can beckon ogres within a 10-kilometer expanse. He used to harvest experience with ease in the game, so he's well acquainted with its effects. The scene reverts back a little to when Kyle first broached ogre perfume in the presence of Leon Hart. The warrior swiftly affirms that he's never known of it previously. In reply, Kyle states that if no one is aware of this, then he must be the original creator of it, which also validates the notion that the formula for ogre fragrance isn't recognized in this realm yet. He clarifies that it's a scent that calls ogres within its vicinity, with the purity dictating how extensive the radius becomes. Leon Hart reminds him that the aim of the subjugation unit is to confront a goblin lair, and ogres are formidable monsters, so the unit will grapple against them. Kyle affirms that this is precisely what he is striving for. He indicates that there are 12 high-caliber veteran warriors in the subjugation unit, so while goblins would be controllable, ogres are a different matter. Additionally, the remainder of the soldiers in the 5th Legion are just a disorganized mob. Despite being termed a warrior unit, their devotion to Adolf is undeniable, but their individual proficiencies are wanting, it seems. This legion is composed entirely of street ruffians, whom Adolf indoctrinated with shadowy powers. The potent indoctrination transformed them into zealots, permitting Adolf to not only broaden his sway, but also to exhibit his dominion over even the most desperate individuals. They are now subserviently managed. And if Adolf were to issue a directive during the succession rites, a catastrophe would probably transpire, with his warriors prepared to go to any length for him. Even street hoodlums are part of this domain, and the indoctrinated high-caliber warriors are particularly problematic. To lessen the peril of such allegiance turning against it, our protagonist intends to diminish the 5th Legion's might as much as feasible before the succession ceremony. Commencing with the 12 high-caliber veteran warriors, he aims for them to perish heroically combating the ogres. Kyle's part is to endure this lethal confrontation and return with the distinction of vanquishing the ogres, thereby solidifying his standing and showcasing his own merit. As the potent fragrance from the ogre perfume permeates the vast countryside, the ogres find themselves lured by it, and shortly thereafter the encampment is fiercely assaulted. The soldiers are plunged into disarray, uncertain of what's transpiring. One of the high-ranking warriors attempts to reassure his companions, telling them not to waver because it's just a simple ogre. However, their assurance is demolished when the same warrior is pulverized, like a fruit beneath the colossal hand of an ogre. The soldiers quiver and shrink back in terror, comprehending that if a high-caliber warrior can be overcome so readily, they possess no prospect against these behemoths. That's when Kyle leaps into the fray, exhorting everyone to compose themselves again. He rebukes them for cowering, reminding them that esteemed Saltarian warriors don't act in that manner. He further emphasizes that if they withdraw, the ogres will overrun their domain, so they must halt the ogres here, regardless of the price at that instant. Baron Jerome appears on horseback, relieved to observe that our protagonist is living and unharmed. He instructs Kyle to make his getaway while he manages the behemoth, stressing that his well-being is the utmost concern for him. But our protagonist resolutely proclaims that he won't flee. He makes it evident that he will remain and battle with everyone until the very conclusion because he can't confront Brother Adolf if he forsakes his followers and escapes alone. He questions the thin mustache if there's anything improper with his choice. Baron is quite moved by the valor our protagonist is exhibiting and gazes back at him with profound respect. That's when Kyle unleashes a magical incantation, bestowing Baron an additional surge. As the incantation materializes, Baron feels more nimble and more revitalized. Kyle clarifies that since he is still a first sphere sorcerer, he will provide support and direct from the rear guard. He tells Baron to take the vanguard and fight valiantly. The man swiftly concurs with his young master's directive. With a firm grasp on his blade, he alights from his steed and contemplates Kyle's bravery and unwavering resolve in combat. He concedes that our protagonist is truly an indispensable treasure to Brother Adolf, and he resolves to inform him that his younger sibling is quite devoted to him. With a resolute posture, Baron unleashes a dreadful measure of energy, making the earth fracture under the impact. He dares the ogre to confront him and charges towards the monstrous creature. The soldiers observe and wonder as their superior advances onward without a particle of reluctance. Galvanized by Baron's dauntless stance, they understand they can't permit themselves to appear pitiful. Stimulated by their superior, they decide to shadow him at all expenses and combat with everything they possess. Kyle delivers a final impetus, encouraging the soldiers to press forward and meet the peril with all their vigor. The warriors, motivated by his pronouncements, advance towards their fated demise, lacking any hint of reluctance. In the meantime, Kyle grins to witness his scheme materializing just as he had envisioned. Although the soldiers are robust, his fragrance has summoned exceptionally potent ogres, 2 or 3 times more menacing than ordinary. He persists in rallying the 5th Legion, while internally he could not help but to feel elation that this will be their ultimate confrontation. The soldiers are caught unawares and are ruthlessly butchered by the colossal, 2-headed gigantic ogres. Notwithstanding all of this horrific carnage, Thin Mustache charges at one of the ogres with his weapon unsheathed, his eyes flaring with retribution. He bellows for the monster to perish and brandishes his sword with all his energy. As he persists in battling the ogre, one of the warriors glances around and comprehends that most of their high-ranking warriors have already been slain, with only a handful remaining. The soldier commences to tremble with dread, wondering if he can even escape alive, as the adversary proves to be far too mighty to oppose. In the meantime, Kyle continues to smirk, perceiving this as his sole opportunity to reduce his brother's warriors. Initially, there were approximately 12 high-ranking warriors, but now only 3 endure, including Thin Mustache Baron. Baron also has been strained to his breaking point and is doubtful whether they can attain triumph. He mulls over employing his ultimate recourse, which is the might of darkness. Before unleashing this formidable power, he remembers brother Adolf's caution. Adolf had informed him that the might of darkness would make him mightier and permit him to perceive a power unlike anything he had known before. Fully releasing it would entail a price. He would be incapable of returning to his former self, morphing into a frenetic beast and forfeiting his humanity. Consequently, Adolf counseled him not to discharge this power rashly. Thin Mustache grapples with the choice, knowing that utilizing this power could be a final measure in their dire predicament. Despite the peril, he decides to unleash his shadowy might. He knows that while he might be capable of defeating the twin-headed ogre, he won't be able to restrain his fury, and losing command is still preferable to perishing like a sheep. However, just as he readies to unleash his power, a spear of lightning plummets from the heavens, impacting the beast and stunning it completely. It transpires that the lightning originated from Kyle. He directs Thin Mustache to breach the enemy formations, while he furnishes backup from the edge. Thin Mustache overflows with admiration for our protagonist. He quickly assents to the strategy, while he feels comforted that he ultimately does not have to resort to using his dark powers. Kyle then invokes a spell identified as Mind Purification, which swiftly mends everyone within its compass. Thin Mustache is both astonished and amazed by the result, as they feel revitalized and their intellects are unburdened. This restores their determination, reminding them that they are the 5th Legion under Adolf's direction. Re-energized and focused, they resume battling the twin-headed ogre. With revitalized resolve, one of the elite warriors strikes the monster directly on its distended head, but the ogre hurls him away with a solitary swat. And with this one felled, only 2 elite warriors persist. The monster pivots, seizes the remaining warrior, and slams him against a tree with such might that nothing endures but a spatter of gore. This leaves just 1 elite warrior surviving. Baron Jerome Kyle just smirks after observing his plan reach fruition. You see, his foremost objective was to eradicate the 12 elite warriors, strengthened by Adolf's shadowy sorcery. And with 11 deceased, only Baron Jerome lingers. Thin Mustache quakes in apprehension as he beholds the remnants of his comrades strewn about. Notwithstanding his trepidation, he remains steadfast and tells Kyle to cast that incantation once again, vowing that he will shortly terminate the existence of the altered ogre. Kyle, on the contrary, just displays his characteristic smirk and he finally unleashes the spell and trap. And these hand-like protrusions emerge from thin air to seize the warrior from all directions, making him incapable of movement. The warrior is utterly perplexed by his incapacity to budge. Kyle serenely instructs him to keep his gaze forward, because the ogre is directly before him. That is when the brute commences grinning at the spectacle of its quarry. Immobilized, lifts its hand and pulverizes thin mustache with a savage blow, leaving the other soldiers in astonishment and despondency. They are at a complete loss now that their superior is deceased. The ogre then shifts its focus towards the remaining soldiers, but before it can move, a tempest of fire engulfs the monster, incinerating it alive and leaving the soldiers in utter amazement. The ogre collapses to the earth. Vanquished and charred, Kyle alights from the knoll and lands precisely atop the seared corpse of the ogre. With exactness, he extracts a gem from the monster's carcass, which seems to be a component of an elite entity. With his scheme officially executed as designed, he resolves to conclude his performance. He proclaims to everyone that the altered ogre has been defeated, and he attributes credit to Baron's martyrdom, which afforded Kyle the chance to strike and conquer the monster. He also commends the 12 heroic warriors who battled altruistically. As the sun ascends, Kyle finishes his address, stating they have ultimately triumphed and survived to witness another dawn. Initially, everyone is wide-eyed and hesitant how to respond, but presently, they commence to radiate with joy at their arduously won triumph. They exult with their arms raised skyward, basking in the glorious victory. As the group commences their return journey to the manor, our protagonist reflects on the remarkable triumph of the subjugation, the eradication of the altered two-headed ogre, along with the original objective of obliterating the goblin clan, is a momentous accomplishment. However, it entailed a substantial price, and the sacrifices were not trivial. Once they finally arrive at the manor, Brother Adolf is astounded and swiftly inquires if Baron Jerome is genuinely deceased. Kyle gravely replies that Baron combated the altered ogre to his demise, and without his ferocious struggle, no one, including Kyle himself, would have endured shattered by the tidings. Adolf draws back the draperies, concealing the lifeless form of his most devoted subordinate. He is indeed aghast to see that Baron Jerome is gone, but what distresses him even further is that it seems Baron had not utilized the might of darkness. The forfeiture of Baron, Jerome, and the high-caliber veteran warriors is an agonizing blow to Adolf, and it propels him into a vehement fury, though he doesn't articulate his wrath directly. Conversely, he feigns to be solicitous and conveys relief that his younger sibling is still among the living. He recognizes that Kyle's triumph over the altered ogre is praiseworthy and states he will notify their progenitor and guarantee he is suitably recompensed for his feats. The junior sibling replies with a wide grin and expresses gratitude to Adolf for his pronouncements. As they finally start to enter the manor, Kyle chuckles to himself, pondering if he has genuinely managed in duping his elder brother. Night descends, and we discover our protagonist socializing with his warrior and attendant, appearing quite content with himself. He's recounting how he succeeded in achieving 2 objectives with 1 action. He diminished the 5th Legion's power and secured Brother Adolf's approval. Additionally, he acquired the core of the altered ogre, which will be exceptionally beneficial for treating Hernimum effectively. Come to consider, it is more like achieving 3 aims with 1 maneuver. Regardless, Leon Hart is comforted that he returned without harm, but he observes it was quite perilous. Kyle just dismisses it casually, stating that 1 altered ogre was no significant challenge for him, and he is positive that he could have managed it without exertion. He merely desired to feign being weaker to demonstrate to everyone that he is just an innocuous youth. Leon Hart then inquires if he intends to remain with Brother Adolf's faction, and what his intentions are for Lord Abel. Kyle just grins in reply and tells him to bide his time and observe, assured that Brother Abel will seek him out on his own accord. A few rotations later, the principal figures of the Celtarian lineage convene in the assembly chamber to scrutinize the outcomes of the subjugation and determine how to allocate the spoils. During the deliberation, the Marquis notes he wishes to discuss Kyle's involvement in the ogre's downfall and invites any dissenting views. There's a rustle of astonishment and incredulity among the family members, who find it challenging to accept that Kyle was even instrumental in defeating the monster. Whatsoever on the other side, Adolf sits with a self-satisfied smirk, already scheming to keep Kyle steadfastly in his camp. One of the attendees in the assembly chamber finally raises their hand, indicating that Kyle's purported major role in the hunting expedition sounds like a slight exaggeration. This detractor is Baron Hemington, a somewhat corpulent individual known for his candor. The Marquis requests an elaboration, and Baron Hemington replies that, while it's widely known how much the Marquis cherishes his youngest scion and frequently commends him, the truth is that Kyle is merely a first sphere magician, fundamentally a novice new to sorcery. Given the difficulties our protagonist has created previously, Hemington contends that simply participate in the subjugation and returning unharmed doesn't justify credit for the monster's defeat. It's difficult to imagine that someone could mature so rapidly, instantly, and play such a decisive part. He also proceeds to underscore that Kyle has consistently been a problematic child. Until this very moment, the other family members appeared to nod in agreement, plainly concerned about what sort of trouble Kyle might be devising. Now Kyle, in the interim, is somewhat captivated by the reality that these boisterous individuals have no compunctions about speaking negatively of him. Directly in his vicinity, it seems, the original Kyle is living up to his notoriety as a troublesome youth, which isn't overly astonishing. At that juncture, Kyle himself resolves to interject. He confronts the Baron straightforwardly, pointing out that he was on hand when the altered ogres were on a rampage, and merely enduring and observing such a spectacle is a feat in itself. He implores the Baron to re-evaluate his stance, stressing that only someone who has confronted a monster like that directly can genuinely comprehend the true horror. He further provokes the portly man by asking if he believes managing such a menace is as simple as it appears. Naturally, Baron Hemington is visibly disconcerted by our protagonist's challenging demeanor as he fumbles for a retort. Lord Abel also interjects. He notes that even standard ogres are difficult to manage, even for multiple high-caliber veteran warriors, considering the ogre Kyle confronted was a two-headed one twice, as potent as a standard ogre. The fact that Kyle returned alive is truly nothing short of a wonder. Our protagonist feels somewhat bewildered to see his eldest sibling championing him, which is an infrequent display of backing. On the other side, Baron Hemington attempts to rebut by asserting that Kyle's survival was attributable to the warriors, jeopardizing their lives to shield him. He underscores that all 12 high-caliber veteran warriors perished, which clearly indicates that Kyle's survival was more a stroke of fortune and the martyrdom of others, rather than his own capability. Lord Abel speaks up once more and highlights the fact that the strike that slew the altered ogre was administered by Kyle's incantation, as validated by the surviving warriors. He concedes that, while Kyle may have been a nuisance during his formative years, he still made substantial contributions in this subjugation and is now concentrated on studying sorcery assiduously. Abel contends that it would be equitable for Baron Hemington to dismiss his bias and acknowledge Kyle's accomplishments. The portly man attempts to dispute further, but Adolf silences him with a raised tone, inquiring if he genuinely thinks he possesses the prerogative to mention Kyle's past transgressions and critique a direct heir of the Celtarians over unsubstantiated allegations. Adolf then interrogates if he is attempting to exceed his jurisdiction. This causes Hemington to recoil in apprehension, swiftly disavowing any such motive. In the meantime, Kyle, the individual of the moment, is utterly flabbergasted by what's unfolded. Both of his siblings are actually championing him. Adolf finally regains composure, clears his throat, and addresses their progenitor, proclaiming that his ballot is in Kyle's support. He fully recognizes his younger siblings' achievements and insists they must be given due credit. He reminds his progenitor that the 5th Legion is directly under his authority, and all of the lads attested that his young sibling fought valiantly. With both Abel and Adolf in accord, their progenitor delivers the ultimate judgment. If both siblings concur, there are no disagreements to acknowledging Kyle's input. Marquis proclaims that from this point forward, Kyle is formally at liberty to enter and exit the primary dwelling, and he may even depart the estate. Our protagonist beams with elation upon hearing his progenitor's decision. However, his progenitor continues to state that the plunder recovered from the altered ogre will be allocated based on contribution, and that Kyle will not obtain any of it. This catches our protagonist unprepared, as he wasn't anticipating being excluded like that. With those concluding pronouncements, his progenitor adjourns the assembly and everyone is permitted to depart. But Kyle remains there, utterly dumbfounded by the latter portion of his progenitor's verdict. He has no inkling why, despite being recognized for his contributions, he isn't receiving any plunder. Before his progenitor departs, Kyle swiftly calls out to him, attempting to beguile him with his guileless expression, and inquires if he's genuinely not going to receive any spoils after all. His arduous labor, that is. When his progenitor inclines nearer to his scion's ear and murmurs about the ogre core that Kyle already purloined. As soon as his progenitor's whispered words register, Kyle's breath hitches in his throat. He swiftly replies, stating he doesn't require the spoils regardless, and that just having his confinement lifted is more than adequate for him. His elder sibling recalls he upheld his pledge of apprising their progenitor regarding his feats, stating he performed it entirely from affection for his younger sibling. Kyle, nevertheless, can perceive through the adulation, comprehending precisely where Adolph's pronouncements originate. Concurrently, Abel is likewise positioned off in the yonder, silently contemplating how greatly Kyle has altered in merely several rotations. He is unquestionably anticipating encountering his younger sibling privately. It appears our protagonist's forecast has materialized ultimately. In the subsequent view, we observe Abel and Kyle converse. Immediately from the outset, Abel unleashes a startling bit of tidings, asserting that he doesn't genuinely possess any notable talents. And this marks the initial instance he's ever divulged it to another. Not even their progenitor is aware. Kyle simply follows along with the dialogue. However, in his mind, he's contemplating, why is my sibling unexpectedly unleashing clandestine revelations like this? Kyle had been prepared to converse with Abel, yet he didn't anticipate the dialogue to adopt such an unforeseen trajectory. Prior to delving deeper, let's backtrack somewhat. Immediately following the assembly's conclusion, Abel neared our protagonist and individually offered commendation for the arduous effort he invested in this conquest. He indicates that Kyle has presently triumphantly validated himself in actual warfare. Thus, he assuredly bestows a designation of a genuine sorcerer upon our protagonist. Kyle, nevertheless, understates it humbly, declaring he's still distant from that honorific. Ultimately, he's merely a first sphere sorcerer, and he attributes his triumph to pure fortune. Once Abel assumes command of the dialogue, he swiftly extends an invitation to his younger sibling for supper, remarking, had delight in hearing further regarding his deeds throughout the conquest. At that juncture, our protagonist concurred with a grin. However, now, seated opposite his sibling, he comprehends the genuine motive for the summons, which is that his elder sibling is endeavoring to enlist him to his faction. Yet what our protagonist cannot decipher is why his elder sibling is unexpectedly divulging such an intimate confidence. There doesn't appear to be any malicious motive, yet he's still grappling to grasp what Abel is genuinely attempting to accomplish by disclosing something so confidential. Irrespective of the situation, our protagonist's thoughts are also on the grander scheme. If he desires to securely traverse the marquee of Keltarian uprising, occurrence Abel's might must expand as Adolph's sway deteriorates. Solely with steadfast backing from the Marquisate of Celtari will Kyle possess an opportunity to endure this imaginary strategic contest. Thus he comprehends he must be exceedingly prudent with his statements now. With that in consideration, he faces his elder sibling and inquires why he is divulging such a momentous confidence that not even their progenitor is cognizant of. Abel retorts by inquiring if his younger sibling isn't keen on listening to the entire narrative. Initially, our protagonist concedes that he would appreciate hearing what his elder has to impart. However, upon discovering such a substantial confidence, he's uncertain how to respond and what Abel genuinely perceives of him. The elder swiftly discerns Kyle's apprehension and pointedly inquires if he is anxious that there could be hidden agendas underlying disclosing such pivotal intelligence. Kyle abashedly grins and somewhat concurs with what his siblings state. He additionally concedes that he merely cannot triumph against his elder sibling in contests of intellect. Thus he resolves to be candid. He elucidates that although he is presently allied with Adolf, he doesn't genuinely endorse him. Nevertheless, this doesn't signify he intends to join Abel's faction either. The view then shifts to the training area of the manor, where we discover Adolf releasing his exasperations on the practice figures. Patently perturbed, one of the attendants is stationed close, observing him with a blend of solicitude and unease. His vexation, seemingly, becomes manifest as he voices his annoyance that his eldest sibling visited Kyle's abode. The attendant additionally corroborates this and states that there were sentinels positioned externally. Thus, she was incapable of eavesdropping on their dialogue. Adolf declares that he already comprehends why Abel desired to encounter Kyle, and what they conferred upon, he makes it unequivocally evident that he was the initial one to target our protagonist and is not intending to forfeit him to Abel readily. He subsequently directs the attendant to contaminate Kyle's sustenance if he ever exhibits any indications of contemplating allying with Abel, underscoring that this is exactly why she was positioned there. The woman appears apprehensive and terrified by these severe directives, yet unwillingly consents to execute the assignment. The view reverts to Kyle and Abel's conference, when the elder inquires of him why he isn't inclined to join his faction. Our protagonist wavers to reply. Well, we all just witnessed what Adolf is contriving against our protagonist if he aligns with Abel's faction. Thus, it's no astonishment that he does not desire to affiliate, yet he does not utter anything to Abel concerning this. Conversely, he astonishes him by declaring, Abel is a benevolent individual, truly. This unforeseen retort takes the elder by surprise, while our protagonist persists in stating how benevolent his eldest sibling is. Seemingly, Kyle's pronouncements are sincere, particularly considering his apparatus indicates that Abel's fondness level towards him is nil. This is in fact a favorable omen, considering that most individuals possess unfavorable ratings in fondness towards our protagonist. Abel, on the contrary, concedes he's pleased to hear such benevolent pronouncements. Nevertheless, he also experiences remorse for not giving heed to his younger sibling and solely appearing when he required assistance. Kyle comforts him in retort, stating he shouldn't feel culpable. He recognizes his own impudent conduct in the bygone and concedes he also detests his previous persona. He is merely content that his elder sibling didn't just disregard him for being a rascal, and he's appreciative for that. Abel erupted into robust mirth when he hears the witty observation from his junior. He quips that if he had realized his younger sibling was so astute and discerning, he would have encountered him earlier. Subsequently, Abel becomes somber and informs Kyle that irrespective of what Adolf has vowed, Abel can furnish the equivalent and even superior. He inquires of him if there's any prospect for reevaluation. Our protagonist ultimately voices his thoughts, declaring that if he affiliates with Adolf, he's positive Abel wouldn't harbor animosity. However, if he joins Abel conversely, Adolf would be merciless and could perhaps even slay him. He additionally clarifies that Adolf is genuinely pitiless and would resort to any measures to eradicate him if he transforms into an impediment. He mentions that he just narrowly endured an ordeal and, as a first sphere sorcerer, lacks sufficient might to shield himself if Adolf resolves to aim for him. Our protagonist questions Head possess a prospect. Abel stays silent upon hearing this harsh appraisal. He observes that our protagonist is the sole family member who has ever articulated such a resolute perspective on Adolf. When Kyle inquires if he concurs with this judgment, Abel merely nods in affirmation. Prior to plunging deeper into the dialogue, Abel at last divulges that his apparently minor talent is in reality a sharp foresight. He clarifies that since his youth, he's consistently possessed a persistent premonition when something unfortunate was on the verge of occurring. This foresight has aided him in eluding perilous circumstances. Nevertheless, as they near the succession rituals, these foreboding sensations have escalated, particularly concerning Adolf, who is emitting some genuinely perilous emanations. Abel concedes, though, that he doesn't possess tangible evidence to validate any malevolent designs from Adolf. Thus, he cannot be wholly certain. This disclosure somewhat captivates our protagonist. He commences pondering if Abel is genuinely cognizant of what's transpiring around him. What's astonishing is that this degree of perception should be merely a rudimentary precognition. Yet Abel also appears to detect shadowy power, and he never possessed that capability in the game. It prompts him to question what's occurring. Could it be that since he arrived in this game realm, just as Kyle acquired new talents, other NPCs might have likewise transformed? He recalls how Urshil, who was intended to be his secondary figure, has cultivated an inherent gift for spirit sorcery nonetheless. Abel interjects once more, stating that even though Adolf is his junior sibling and second in succession for the Marquisate, their progenitor doesn't believe he'll transgress any perilous boundaries, even if he becomes somewhat radical. Abel's just endeavoring to remain wary. Because of this foreboding sensation he harbors concerning Adolf, he concedes that this much isn't adequate to persuade others, which is why he's maintained it as a confidence. Our protagonist indicates that if brother Adolf becomes the heir of the Marquis of Sultarian, the entire vicinity will descend into turmoil and none of them will be secure. Abel appears to grasp the rationale underlying this. Thus he inquires of Kyle if he genuinely possesses a strategy. Our protagonist eventually discloses that he's intended to feign being on Adolf's faction for the present, monitor his maneuvers, and behave like a devoted adherent to make him lower his guard. Then Hell sees his opportunity. Abel then underscores that this does not appear as straightforward as it sounds. Kyle clarifies that's precisely why he requires aid, and inquires of his elder sibling if he'd be amenable to assisting him. Abel is briefly astonished, yet swiftly regains composure and chuckles, while remarking how he can decline his endearing younger sibling's entreaty like that. He consents to aid Kyle from the obscurity. With that resolved, our protagonist states he has one boon to request. Yet before we can learn about that boon, the view shifts to provide us a glimpse of the manor. A few rotations have elapsed since the dialogue with his sibling. Within Kyle's chamber, we observe a mound of platinum currency. Leon Hart exclaims in astonishment as he asserts that merely one of these coins is valued at several times his monthly stipend. He inquires of Kyle how he contrived to acquire so much currency. Our protagonist impishly retorts that he pilfered it from his elder sibling. The warrior is aghast and inquires if he purloined it from Abel. Kyle affirms positively, and the view reverts to the bygone. There we observe Kyle requesting his sibling for a substantial sum of currency. Abel, without reluctance, inquires how much he requires and vows to ready the funds straight away, stating it's merely a small present for his younger sibling. Thus, he does not need a recompense for it currently. Our protagonist joyfully discloses that he had no inkling his elder sibling was so munificent. Amidst all this, Leon Hart also observed a gleaming sphere in the mound of coins and inquisitively questions his superior concerning it. Kyle clarifies that it's an individual communication sphere that his sibling bestowed upon him so they can maintain contact. The warrior deems this preposterous and indicates that these spheres are so costly. He could readily acquire a manor with a garden for the equivalent sum. Kyle recognizes the considerable worth of these articles, yet corrects his warrior that the sphere is a rudimentary model, as it can solely be utilized for direct correspondence with him. The warrior then gazes at Kyle, perceiving the elation on his countenance, and deduces that his discussions with Lord Abel must have proceeded favorably. Kyle affirms that they did proceed well, and that his elder sibling is genuinely a kind individual. He then presents the currency to Leon Hart, stating he can retain it as he'll require it sooner. Leon Hart inquires what he intends to utilize all this currency for, since they've completed refurbishing the atelier and lately acquired sorcery and spirit gems, so they shouldn't require more currency for a duration. Kyle states he intends to generate more funds with this sum, and that it's merely his venture capital. In a subsequent view, we receive a vivid portrayal depicting Urshil executing spirit sorcery as she intones her incantation. Padaki commences to radiate like a brilliant sun in the firmament, leaving Urshil perplexed by this unforeseen consequence. She had initially intended for her staff to illuminate, yet instead Padaki reacted to her intonation. While Padaki nestles upon Kyle's cranium, the maiden exclaims at her to cease ascending onto his cranium. Yet our protagonist comforts her that it's entirely alright, and even quips that it's akin to possessing a head torch. Leon Hart, ever the most straightforward fellow, just face bombs in exasperation and swiftly inquires what they're undertaking in the catacomb right now. Well, this is somewhat of a pertinent query, and I also desire to know precisely what they are undertaking here. Yet our protagonist remains ambiguous when questioned regarding their pursuits, merely declaring they are in a catacomb because it's a catacomb. Leonhardt, patently vexed, insists on a more lucid response. He reminds Kyle that they had departed the manor with the aim of visiting the adjacent territory of Empelon. Thus he desires to know why they're now in a catacomb. Kyle persists in being elusive, clarifying that there's a catacomb en route to Empelon, and since they were journeying nearby, they resolve to take a swift glance. Once more, Leonhardt is exasperated with his superior's ambiguous retort. He resolves to abandon inquiring and merely declares that they should depart from the catacomb, since it's not a location to remain for long. Kyle retorts, stating that their exploration of the catacomb is just commencing. Leonhardt obstinately reminds him that it's perilous. He indicates that as they've advanced deeper into the cavern, the quantity of creatures has steadily diminished. This likely signifies a chieftain monster dwells further within, as lesser and mid-tier monsters tend to shun chieftain territories. Leonhardt discloses that he's managed to cope with matters up till now, yet he's uncertain what trials they might confront if they proceed. He asserts they should retreat while they still are able. That's when Kyle makes it evident that they are not retreating, because the chieftain is precisely what they're pursuing. Leonhardt is astounded by his superior's disclosure and inquires if departing the residence under the guise of heading to Empel was all merely a ruse. Kyle replies that it wasn't entirely inaccurate, as they do possess affairs in Empel. Nevertheless, he clarifies that he chanced to know there was a catacomb en route. If he had stated from the outset that they were intending to investigate the catacomb, I wouldn't have been permitted to depart the residence alone. Twice as many sentinels would have trailed them. He is certain that his second sibling's informants and his elder sibling's sentinels would have escorted him as well, which is not a positive thing at all. It would have been unfeasible to explore the catacomb with such a throng, and if a conflict had erupted amongst them, everyone would have been ensnared in the midst. Furthermore, there are complications with Urgel, since Urgel is practicing spirit sorcery, which Kyle desires to keep clandestine. He has solely informed his progenitor and doesn't wish his siblings to know just yet. Consequently, bringing Padaki out in front of individuals would be troublesome. He then confronts the elephant in the chamber, disclosing that the foremost issue is dividing the plunder, if they include more individuals. Yet Leonhardt indicates that with just a trio of them, it's rather imprudent. He concedes that he might be an upper-tier expert warrior. Yet Urgel has only just commenced learning spirit sorcery, while the warrior maintains his objection. Kyle at last interjects with an impassioned tone that leaves the warrior astounded and mute. Kyle reminds him that just because he feigned weakness back in the manor, it doesn't signify he should accept it at superficial worth. The might of his sorcery, which has vanquished Hernemo, is drastically distinct from ordinary sorcery, and Leonhardt himself is a witness to that. With that in consideration, Kyle asks him if he still harbors any reluctance. He stresses that they possess a formidable unit, Leonhardt as their bulwark, Urgel as the mender, and himself as the DPS with everything they require in place. Our protagonist sees no reason why they shouldn't explore the catacomb. For one final instance, he tells his warrior to cease underestimating his superior and exhibit some belief and confidence. He then challenges Leonhardt by inquiring if he still harbors doubts, to whom he would select to be devoted, his progenitor or Kyle, before Leonhardt can reply. Kyle makes it evident that he doesn't require a warrior who serves two superiors. He desires a warrior who serves him exclusively. This places Leonhardt in quite a predicament, and he wavers to respond. While our protagonist comprehends, the reluctance stems from the fact that Leonhardt is only here, as per the Marquis' directives, to safeguard his son, no matter how devotedly he serves Kyle. His genuine superior is the Marquis. Our protagonist has realized that merely displaying sentiment won't be sufficient to secure Leonhardt's allegiance, and compelling him would only backfire severely. The fact that Leonhardt wavers comforts Kyle that the warrior at least acknowledges him as a superior worth considered. With that resolve, they continue their journey deeper into the catacomb. Leonhardt, with renewed determination, vows to be the impenetrable bulwark of Racina. As they step confidently into the main chieftain chamber, they discover the massive creature seated silently. The chamber is revealed to be the Minotaur's secret haven, the name of the catacomb itself. Kyle observes the Minotaur is much larger than he anticipated, especially since in fantasy defense. This catacomb was known as a novice farming location. It had no snares, a short route, few creatures, and most importantly, the rewards were incredibly lavish compared to a challenge. This is precisely why he kept the group small, because he isn't about to share such riches with anyone else. Leon Hart then discloses that the Minotaur is said to be 3 times mightier than, and Ogre Kyle concurs, indicating that while the Minotaur doesn't utilize sorcery, it possesses incredible might. If Leon Hart attempts to block its giant mallet without sword energy, his bones could easily fracture. Kyle instructs him to take the vanguard, draw the Minotaur's aggression, and block its hammer assaults. He vows to cast a shield incantation to bolster Leon Hart's defenses. With the added shield and sword energy, Leon Hart should be able to withstand the heavy assaults. Nevertheless, Kyle warns that there's one assault to be especially wary of. When a Minotaur becomes enraged and charges like a bovine, it commences a whirlwind assault. Kyle advises Leon Hart to evade this assault entirely, because even the strongest shield won't hold up against it. He suggests luring the Minotaur to the periphery, while dodging its assaults as much as feasible. Once the Minotaur's whirlwind assault ceases, the monster will be fatigued and disoriented. And that's when Leon Hart should unleash his assault. Leon Hart acknowledges the directives, and Kyle turns to Urgel. He tells her to cast enhancements on him and Leon Hart. Before the battle commences, since this is her first genuine engagement, he suggests that if she gets frightened, she should conceal herself behind a boulder. However, Urgel confidently replies that she's not afraid. Yet the real issue is that she hasn't fully mastered spirit sorcery. Notwithstanding that, she is determined to support Kyle and show the results of her practice. Kyle is quite impressed by her resolve and agrees to let her participate. The battlefield yet warns her not to overexert. He advises her to always maintain a secure distance and retreat if she feels like the situation is becoming too perilous. He further explains to her that as the party's mender and buffer, her most important role is not safeguarding it, but ensuring her own security. He reminds her that as long as she stays secure, they will have plenty of opportunities to triumph. In essence, she holds both his and Leon Hart's lives in her grasp. Urgel is quite moved to realize how our protagonist is placing so much trust in her, which makes her blush as she promises to execute her duties. Leon Hart, on the contrary, stands silently and could not help but to notice how much Kyle comprehends. From the location of this hidden catacomb to the importance of a mender and the specific strategies to defeat the Minotaur. These are things one only learns through actual encounters. Leon Hart can't resist asking Kyle directly how he seems so knowledgeable about dungeon expeditions. Despite this being his first time entering one, Kyle is caught off guard by his warrior's query and struggles to come up with a plausible retort. He mentally berates himself for acting like he knows too much, forgetting that he's supposed to be a 13-year-old youth. He realizes that despite any magical brilliance he might possess, it would be unusual for someone his age to have such extensive knowledge about dungeon expeditions. Eventually, he comes up with an excuse, claiming he learned some basic tips during the goblin pursuit when dealing with the ogre. Leon Hart finds this explanation hard to accept, questioning how Kyle could have learned about the Minotaur's attributes and attack patterns from knights who were struggling with ogres. Well, it seems like our protagonist is not getting anywhere with his feeble retorts. He's unsure why his knight is pressing so many queries and fears that Leon Hart might be close to discovering that he's not the genuine Kyle. He envisions a nightmarish scenario where Leon Hart stands up in front of everyone and announces that this is not Kyle, but an imposter. Chaos erupts, and our protagonist can practically hear the crowd cheering as they pummel him with everything they've got. Then he pictures himself all bound up in front of his elder siblings, who are convinced that this brat must be possessed by a fiend. They've been suspicious from the outset, especially since he's changed so much in just a few rotations. The idea of being burned alive sends tremors down his spine, so he quickly blurts out that he read about it in a tome. The knight still looks unsure and is trying to piece it all together, but Kyle tries to convince him that it's true, mentioning that he spent a lot of time in the library. Oh yeah, he might have secretly read some strategy tomes too. The knight is totally bewildered, but then his expression alters. He starts to admire his superior anew, saying that it all makes sense now. He points out how Kyle's been frequenting the library often lately, studying like a man on a mission. He's impressed that his master didn't just learn sorcery, but also got the hang of monster tactics. Leonhard is feeling incredibly proud watching his master develop. He's practically buzzing with excitement to report back to the Marquis, sure that he'll be thrilled with his youngest science progress. Meanwhile, as they converse, Kyle notices his affinity with Leonhard increasing. Whatever the case, it's a small but significant triumph for him. After all, he was just about to get undone and barely saved himself from getting slain. Later on, we see Urgel in action. She casts a healing spell, and tiny spirits hasten to Kyle, instantly commencing their labor. Her magic boosts his health and defense by 30%, enhances both his mana and sword energy, and restores lost health while providing automatic mending. Over time, our protagonist can't help but compliment Urgel on how much her spirit magic has advanced. It's clear she's gotten a lot better since she first acquired. With that, the trio is finally ready to take on the Minotaur. While the monster is still slumbering, Leonhart charges forward. But the Minotaur wakes up and swings its massive armament, just as Leonhart is about to strike. After a brief clash, the knight steps back to a secure distance and notices how much more solid and lighter his body feels thanks to Kyle's shield and Urgel's buffs. The Minotaur, now fully awake and furious, lets out a massive roar. It demands to know who these interlopers are and why they dare to disturb its repose. With a menacing growl, it threatens to smash everyone into fragments if they're here to steal its riches. However, the Minotaur's loud mouth is quickly shut up by Kyle's crystal assault, but it only tickles the beast, which just makes it even more vexed. Kyle just stands there with a smug grin, letting the Minotaur know that the real party has just commenced. He then unleashes his ice spear, but the Minotaur blocks the attack with its massive armament and growls in irritation. Leonhart sees his chance and lands a solid slash near the Minotaur's gullet, making blood pour out like a leaky deluge. And was unable to resist, appreciating how formidable his warrior appears. The protagonist then impishly informs the Minotaur that Leonhart is considerably more proficient than he comprehends. The Minotaur becomes increasingly vexed upon hearing this, and hoists its massive armament to pulverize Leonhart. Yet Kyle employs Stone Shield precisely in time to intercept the assault. The unfortunate warrior, on the other hand, quakes beneath the Minotaur's colossal armament, reflecting he was merely a hair's width away from having his skeleton shattered. He's grateful Kyle cast the shield incantation at the ideal juncture. Elsewise, his limbs would have been fragmented beyond mending. What truly astounds him is Kyle's talent to foresee each maneuver and cast incantations at just the opportune moment, flawlessly orchestrating the confrontation. Kyle's combat instincts and spell execution are exceptionally superior, and he's everything under complete command. Our protagonist then casts another incantation that constricts the Minotaur, rendering it incapable of movement. He follows this with a volley of luminous projectiles that strike the monster's overgrown physique. The Minotaur bellows in torment from the searingly hot impacts, while Kyle stands there like an absolute paragon of might. Both Urgel and Leonhart are left utterly flabbergasted by his incredible exhibition of talent. Even the Minotaur cannot help but acknowledge Kyle's exceptional abilities. He's genuinely amazed that a mere mortal has pushed him this far. But do not misconstrue, he still harbors a vendetta against humans and regards them as nothing more than insects. He resolves it is time to demonstrate who's dominant and commences preparing his ultimate assault, the Maelstrom. The atmosphere around him begins to roil as he swings his axe with vehemence. Kyle swiftly alerts his companions that matters are about to intensify. He instructs Leonhart to maintain the Minotaur's focus and guide it to the periphery of the combat zone. Leonhart, ever the conscientious warrior, departs like a swift arrow, while Kyle ensures to bolster his warrior's defenses, readying him for the tempest that's about to strike. As Leonhart approaches closer to the Minotaur, he hurls his blade at the beast from secure range. The Minotaur bellows in fury, his wrath escalating to new zeniths as he charges after Leonhart, who flees towards the outskirts precisely as they strategize. It's a high-risk contest of pursuer in pursuit, with Kyle and his unit executing their roles with perfection. The protagonist initiates a numerical descent from 30, and as he does, we flash back to his prior counsel to Leon Hart, which is to evade the Minotaur's maelstrom assault and not confront it directly after such a tremendous ability. The Minotaur would be depleted and require a moment to regain its breath, and that's when they can retaliate. Back in the current moment, there are only 5 ticks remaining before the Minotaur exhausts itself. Those 5 ticks feel like an interminable duration, as the monster nearly brings its colossal armament, slamming down upon Leon Hart. Just as the final tick elapses, Leon Hart narrowly sidesteps the assault, escaping by a mere hair's width. He's utterly petrified, astonished at how close he came to being struck by that massive armament, though he's also pleased that his near miss was fruitful. He's left wondering if it was all merely a happenstance, or if Kyle had timed it flawlessly from the very beginning. Our protagonist then swiftly employs another incantation, conjuring ice shards that display the full magnitude of his magic. After hurling the shards at the Minotaur, the beast is at last vanquished, leaving behind only its colossal armament. After the confrontation is officially concluded, Urgel is diligently tending to Leon Hart's hand, and once he's mended, he thanks her for her assistance. Concurrently, Kyle is extremely elated regarding the treasure remaining, thrilled to claim it all for his own. The treasure hoard is filled with precious plunder, commencing with a staff that emanates an aggressive aura. This staff not only permits somewhat swifter magic use, but can also retain up to 3 incantations. Retained incantations can be used without expending mana, and possess a maximum spell sphere of the second. Kyle clarifies that in fantasy defense, procuring this staff from the Minotaur Catacomb is an indispensable strategy for sorcerers, offering potent advantages until one becomes a high sphere sorcerer. He's thrilled that this staff signifies he won't have to fret about his armaments. For a duration, Leon Hart, meanwhile, observes a blade he discovered among the treasure. At initial inspection, he can discern that it's unmistakably a superior quality blade with enchanting properties. No surprise the Minotaur was so defensive of it. As he gazes at the treasure, his thoughts flash back to the proposition our protagonist presented to him, which concerned pledging allegiance, whether to the Marquise or to Kyle himself. Leon Hart is experiencing guilt that he is being recompensed with such magnanimity from his youthful superior, even though he cannot even bring himself to pledge fealty to him. Urgel is also feeling a twinge of culpability for consistently receiving items from Kyle. She admits she desires to be of assistance to him, even if just a small amount, but she's uncertain how she could ever repay him if she accepts such precious plunder. Kyle reassures her not to feel that way, stressing how much both she and Leon Hart have contributed to today's confrontation. Yet still Leon Hart concurs with Urgel, stating that the blade is too valuable for him to wield. Kyle sighs at their illogicality and tells them that the gear isn't merely a simple recompense. He anticipates them to become stronger with this superior grade equipment. He stresses that they need to augment their combat prowess urgently, as they're lacking sufficient time. This equipment is intended to aid them significantly, boost their capabilities for the trials that lie ahead. He also acknowledges the regulations regarding reporting and allocating superior grade catacomb rewards through appropriate procedures. But he admits he doesn't plan to adhere to them this instance. He desires to maintain their newfound might and the treasure's confidentiality from the rest of the lineage. He informs Urgel and Leon Hart that they're the sole individuals he can genuinely confide in presently. He urges them to accept the relics, enhance their abilities, and be of assistance to him in the face of approaching darkness in the Sultarian lineage. He stresses that becoming stronger is vital for their very survival. Following this grave conversation, Kyle resolves it is the moment to commence their expedition to Influence. His both companions acknowledge his words with a favorable demeanor, prepared to embark on their journey and confront the challenges ahead. A few rotations later, at the Infulum Manor in the Granary District, turmoil erupts when Count Frantel Neuron, the master of Infulum, discovers that the Sultarian Marquis' lineage has arrived without prior notice. In a condition of shock, Franel is exclaiming and hastening down the steps, desperate to ascertain if it's the elder or younger scion who has materialized his aid. A spectacled gentleman clarifies that he's not certain, but they bear the Sultarian insignia, which only direct heirs of the lineage can possess. Frantel is utterly agitated, wondering if the Seltarians are contemplating involving his domain in their lineage. Succession predicament, his aide is also anxious about the same matter, and further indicates that it's an unspoken custom to avoid involving other lineages in succession quarrels, but it appears they're entangled in it now. When they finally arrive at the guest chamber, Count Frantel Neuron hesitates for a brief instant to regain his formal composure. He opens the portal with a wide smile, prepared to warmly receive his esteemed visitors from the Seltarian lineage, but his salutation gets caught in his throat when he beholds Kyle seated comfortably in the guest chamber, sipping beverage and savoring some confections. When Kyle perceives the master of the manor, he promptly salutes the Lord and apologizes for the absence of prior notification. Frantel, on the other hand, exclaims in astonishment, inquiring who on earth even this youth is. But a true shocker arrives for Frantel when he realizes that Kyle is the same worthless fourth scion of the Seltarian lineage. He is so astounded that he even uttered this remark audibly, but he swiftly attempts to conceal his reaction with his hand as Leon Hart. Right beside, Kyle directs him a glare that plainly states he's not impressed with the Lord's absence of propriety. In front of his superior, our protagonist attempts to alleviate the strain by saying, "It's all fine," and tells the Lord to relax. He admits he was a troublemaker until recently, but says he's had a transformation of heart ever since he recovered himself from Hermimum. He's been contemplating his past and desires to improve. Frantel is astonished by this tidings and inquires if he genuinely has overcome his malady. Our protagonist affirms, stating he's now forming a group to practice sorcery and hopes it will benefit the lineage. Frantel is struggling to assimilate this because he recalls the youngest as a hopeless nuisance, and he was the type of youth even the Seltarian lineage had abandoned. But observing him now, he realizes he's different from the hearsay. His eyes exhibit no indication of bewilderment. He is also courteous, and his posture is flawless. Not to overlook, our protagonist even possesses the admirable intent of aiding the lineage, which leads Frantel to believe that the unfavorable hearsay tales he had encountered concerning him were undoubtedly untrue. He beams with elation as he realizes that Kyle is actually a decent fellow, contrary to what the hearsay suggests. He then indicates how proud our protagonist's progenitor must be with his youngest scion, and the reason for his progenitor's elation is that, in generations of swordsmen, our protagonist is the sole one who's contrived to produce sorcery, making the future of the Solitarium marquee lineage appear incredibly auspicious. With the pleasantries concluded, Frantel returns to matters of substance. He's certain that Kyle didn't journey all the way to Infelrum merely for a casual sojourn, so he inquires what brings him to the settlement. Kyle smirks initially, apologizes for the unannounced sojourn, and clarifies that the Marquis's lineage is in a delicate predicament regarding a succession complication. He didn't desire to attract notice to his maneuvers, so he did not attempt to proclaim his arrival. The genuine reason for his visit is that he desires to procure grain from Infelrum, which is the largest granary in the northern lands. This astonishes Frantel, who indicates that they're already trading grain consistently with the Seltarian lineage. So he wonders if Kyle is seeking to make an additional procurement. Our protagonist affirms this, clarifying that the grain is for his personal utilization and distinct from their standard arrangement. He requires it for magical investigation and cannot delve into specifics presently. He also states that this won't be a singular transaction because he intends to continue purchasing consistently in the future. He's heard that Infelrum has experienced good harvests lately, resulting in a surplus of grain that's difficult to manage. So he desires to procure that excess. Kyle then signals with a finger snap and his warrior advances, opening a coffer with a handful of platinum currency. Even though the quantity of coins is meager, Frantel and his aide are utterly astounded. Their jaws drop as they attempt to comprehend how this youthful man possesses such a fortune. Frantel swiftly regains his composure and states that selling the old grain shouldn't pose a difficulty, as they do possess surplus inventory. He acknowledges that magical investigation is confidential, so he won't intrude into his labor. Kyle smiles back, pleased to be collaborating with Frantel. However, the Lord is inquisitive and inquires how a youthful individual, like our protagonist, acquired such a substantial sum of currency. Transactions with ambiguous funding origins could result in trouble, especially with such a youthful procurer. Our protagonist comforts him, stating that the currency is a present from his sibling. When Frantel inquires if he means Abel, Kyle affirms he does, stating Abel is the sole individual he would designate his eldest sibling. Assuredly, this only makes Frantel even more elated and more disposed to trust Kyle. The fact that Abel readily gave his young sibling such a substantial sum of currency demonstrates they have a close rapport. He deduces that having Kyle and Abel on his side is a superior arrangement than having a connection with their third sibling, Adolphe, who appears to possess sinister motives. With that in consideration, he states that if Abel is vouching for Kyle, he's willing to trust him as well. Once our protagonist secures Frantel's confidence, he commences the deliberations. He proffers 4 silver coins per container, instead of the 7 silver coins Frantel initially requested. Frantel and his aide observe our protagonist with bewildered expressions. Yet Kyle continues with his negotiation. He contends that 7 silver coins for old wheat is somewhat excessive, especially since the additional old wheat is occupying valuable storage area and accruing storage charges daily. He suggests that selling it for 4 silver coins is the optimal choice for both parties. After a great deal of to and fro, Kyle finally agrees upon 5 silver coins per container. Once the deliberations are concluded and they get to the guest chamber for some repose, Kyle is exceedingly joyful. Leon Hart is also impressed by his negotiation talents and inquisitively inquires if he acquired them from tomes. Kyle is caught off guard by this query and abashedly states that the library possesses every tome he could envision. However, the actuality is he's acquired these negotiation talents from bargaining within digital emporiums. The knight then inquires how he intends to generate funds by procuring grain. Kyle clarifies that he intends to procure grain when it's inexpensive and sell it when demand increases to realize a profit. The knight replies that the current grain provision is steady and their Dresden territory has secured stores until the subsequent year. He further indicates that it might be challenging to realize a profit by placing old grain on the market. Kyle simply clarifies that they're preparing proactively because they don't know what might transpire in the future. Understand our protagonist is precisely aware a devastating dearth is imminent. Shortly following the Saltarian Marquis lineage succession rights, unprecedented meteorological aberrations will lead to a severe food shortage, causing grain prices to escalate dramatically. At that juncture, it won't matter whether the grain is new or old. People won't be able to find sustenance even if they possess currency. Kyle keeps this to himself, deducing he can't clarify it to someone like the knight. However, it appears he doesn't need to clarify it regardless. The knight acknowledges that everything Kyle has undertaken thus far has had a justifiable reason, so he trusts that this will be the same as the knight states this. The favorability level elevates to 50, which perplexes his mind, since it was in a negative when they first encountered. Later, that evening, Urgel enters and clarifies that Count Frantel Neuron has something to deliberate before supper and inquires if Kyle could spare a brief instant. When Kyle arrives at Count Nyron's chamber and raps, he enters and states he's heard the Count desire to see him. The Count comforts him that it's nothing grave, since he merely desired to introduce Kyle to someone. Our protagonist inquisitively inquires to whom he's being presented to. That's when a youthful maiden rises and introduces herself as Nyron's offspring. As soon as our protagonist hears her agreeable voice and perceives her, he's visibly astounded. It transpires she's Iris Nyron's, and Kyle clearly wasn't anticipating seeing her. The reason for Kyle's astonishment remains ambiguous for now, yet it appears we must anticipate to learn as this installment concludes here. To comprehend why our protagonist is so astounded to see her, let's analyze that you understand Iris Nyron is not just any figure. She's a total standout with her charming looks and superior tier magic talent. She's got a massive devotee base in fantasy defense, especially in the initial game when everyone is still advancing. But with all the positives, there's a negative aspect as well, which is that she's exceptionally conceited. Certainly she is comely, yet she is also somewhat of a despot, enjoying to tread all over others and detesting anyone feeble. She relishes the opulence of being talented, yet her disposition was equally chaotic as well. Attempting to get on her favorable side usually culminates with you destitute, thanks to her avaricious inclinations. As the game advances, her brilliance begins to diminish with the emergence of S and SSS class sorcerers. She finds herself forsaken by her devotees. Presently Kyle is ensnared, wondering if he should even enlist her to his faction, especially since he's not keen on becoming insolvent. Just to keep her content, he pushes those thoughts aside for now and starts wondering why Count Neyron is introducing his offspring to him. At this juncture, the man, on the other hand, joyfully continues, remarking that his offspring recently reached 11 this end. So there's not much of an age disparity since Kyle is 13. He's hoping they could become good companions. Then the Count adds that she's even studying sorcery these rotations. He insists he's not just stating this because he's her progenitor. She genuinely does possess great talent. Since Kyle is also learning sorcery, the Count deduces they could learn from each other and have a fantastic time together. My protagonist is somewhat at a loss for words, especially since judging by the expression on her countenance, it's clear she's not exactly keen to make companions, even though her progenitor is advocating for it. Eventually, our protagonist salutes her, introducing himself as Kyle Seltarian, the fourth scion of the Marquis of Seltarian. He's attempting to be suave, looking forward to their time together. Just as he states this, he engages his assessment faculty and swiftly ascertains her attributes. Not astonishingly, her traits align perfectly with what we have heard previously, and she has a staggering negative 48 favorability towards him as well. But what truly catches him unprepared is her talent. Mana's companion, you understand. Kyle himself has mana stagnation, a fractured talent he's never observed in anyone else. In the original game, Mana's companion was the paramount talent in the sorcerer category, accessible only to the top 0.01% of SSS class sorcerers. So he's baffled as to how Iris, an A-class sorcerer in fantasy defense, possesses this talent. It's quite clear she's acquired some extra abilities, just like Abel and Urgel, that signifies new potentials have opened up for her, and Kyle can't help but wonder what that means for their interplay. He reflects on how, despite her off-putting personality traits, making her a target for evasion during the game, if he could acquire an SSS level talent, everything would transform. He simply cannot permit himself to miss this opportunity regardless of the cost. On the other hand, Iris, with her characteristic impudence, retorts. She indicates that he's the fourth and final in the Seltarian lineage, line teasing him about how she's never heard of him previously, even though she knows all about the achievements of Abel and Adolf. Keltarian with a smirk. She asserts she's already in the second sphere, while he's still confined in the first. She wonders aloud what they should do about the power disparity, acting like they're on entirely different echelons. Meanwhile, Kyle is doing his utmost to maintain a composed countenance. Yet internally, he is silently reviling her. He can't help but wonder why she's like this and ponders. Does she really have to be such a warped figure? Ever since she was a youth, Kyle calmly replies that yes, he's a first sphere sorcerer. And it's only been 3 moons since he commenced learning sorcery. When Iris hears this, her eyes widen, as she realizes he's reached the first sphere in such a brief time. She can't help but think that he is advancing way quicker than her, twice as rapidly in fact. He then clarifies that he only commenced learning sorcery after reaching 13. Iris reminds him with a hint of impudence that he's late to the endeavor, stating, it's common knowledge to start learning sorcery at around 10 years of age. At the very earliest, Kyle responds positively, agreeing that he did commence somewhat late. But in his thoughts, he's comparing her to a spirited feline. Her natural aggression in her tone makes the affronts almost tolerable. He resolves to share a bit more, telling her he suffered from a hermetic malady and has just recently recovered from it. Iris is genuinely astonished to hear that Kyle has overcome his grave malady, and she blushes, somewhat stating that's actually remarkable. But she quickly snaps out of it defensively, asserting that she is not esteeming him on that account or another. Her progenitor then reminds her that overcoming such a malady typically necessitates extraordinary magical power or the potential to become a great warrior. The fact that Kyle managed to conquer it at just 13 years of age is quite noteworthy. He clarifies that Kyle is only going to get mightier. As he continues to mature, he suggests that Iris should study with him, hoping they can learn from each other and positively influence one another. Iris, however, stays charmingly obstinate. She reminds her progenitor that our protagonist is still in the first sphere, so she's not quite certain what she could learn from someone in a lower sphere than her. Meanwhile, Kyle stands there with a smile fixed across his countenance, thinking about how her characteristic disdain for the feeble is activating. She's underestimating him, assuming he's actually weaker. He thinks to himself how her disposition is somewhat problematic, and he deduces he might need to help her rectify that unfavorable habit. Finally, he resolves that Iris Nairn is the third talented individual he desires by his side. To impress her somewhat, he tells her not to judge a tome by its binding. He steps nearer and confidently states that he'll prove he's not weaker than her. And once he does, she won't be able to disregard him anymore. Iris starts blushing when she perceives Kyle so confident, and she can't help but be somewhat swayed by his demeanor. She then quickly inquires how he intends to prove his might. In response, Kyle invites her to a contest of skill, stating that if he loses, he'll concede she's stronger. But before he can finish speaking, she interrupts him, insisting Shell accept the challenge, and adds with a smirk that if she triumphs, he will be required to kneel down and lick her feet. Well, not going to fib. This doesn't sound half unfavorable either. Her progenitor, however, looks utterly astounded, attempting to discern where she acquired such a peculiar proclivity. Iris abashedly admits she read it in a romantic tale. Her progenitor starts exclaiming at her, demanding to know what kind of twisted romantic tales she's perusing. He quickly forbids any more tomes and bans her from perusing them again. As Iris' eyes start to well up from her progenitor's yelling, Kyle intervenes and assures them that it doesn't matter what the challenge is. If he loses, he'll accept it, even if it involves lapping at feet or even digits. This only alarms her progenitor even further, while Kyle makes it evident that if he triumphs, she will have to accept him as her mentor. He also tells her to promise that she will never look down on anyone, weaker or of inferior standing. Iris pauses for a moment, but eventually concurs, arrogantly asserting she won't lose to someone in the first sphere who just commenced learning sorcery. With that, she departs from a location full of self-assurance, while her progenitor asserts that her disposition is quite problematic. He clarifies that it's because she was nurtured by a lineage that's consistently been proud of her since she was diminutive. He worries that if she continues maturing this way, she'll become increasingly detested by the world, making it harder for her to get along with others. Presently, she doesn't have any companions her age, and it's true that her reputation in social circles isn't favorable. Our protagonist is amazed to see that despite being an indulgent progenitor, he's fully cognizant that his offspring is a problematic youth. It makes him respect the Count somewhat more, realizing he's not just disregarding her imperfections. The Count then highlights how Kyle had a tempestuous childhood himself, contemplating if for that reason he can grasp Iris' mentality and conduct. He believes it would be advantageous for her to experience defeat behind and impart her the severe lessons she warrants. When Kyle hears this, he cannot help but grin. Now, he possesses the progenitor's consent to impart her a lesson, and he is eagerly anticipating it. Meanwhile, Iris is still striding down the corridors, muttering to herself about how he cannot instruct her anything. When he's only at the first sphere, she's feeling quite vexed, but then her thoughts flash back to that recent, heart-thumping instant they shared, and she cannot deny he's actually a comely fellow. Still, her conceit kicks in, and she obstinately tells herself he's just a first sphere sorcerer, determined to make him lick her feet irrespective of what. Strangely enough, despite her demeanor, her favorability towards Kyle starts to ascend. I suppose that's just how tempestuous figures operate. A while later, our protagonist returns to his chamber, and Leonhard indicates that Count Nairn's introduction of his offspring likely has another motive behind it. His superior inquires of him what he means by that, and the knight reminds him that even though she's only 11, it's an age appropriate for discussing matrimonial propositions. Additionally, the age disparity with our protagonist isn't that substantial. This sends a tremor running down Kyle's spine, and he exclaims at Leonhard for even contemplating him getting wedded to an 11-year-old. Leonhard calmly reminds him that aristocrats usually marry earlier than common folk, so it's not atypical to get betrothed in their early adolescence. My protagonist feels like he's about to regurgitate as he finally realizes why Count Neron was so keen to introduce his offspring to him. Leon Hart even tells him not to go too severe in tomorrow's contest, suggesting that they never know what might transpire between the two of them. In the future, he adds that while Iris may be somewhat conceited, she's still just a youthful lady. Kyle, with a mischievous grin, declares that if Iris' progenitor is attempting to arrange his marriage, then he needs to crush her even more comprehensively. He makes it unequivocally evident that with the kind of demeanor she has, there's no possibility he's going to marry her. Absolutely not, he refuses unequivocally. Instead, he resolves he'll utilize all his might to rectify her warped disposition. Suddenly, Urgel becomes animated at the mention of matrimony and propositions, judging by the expression on her countenance. It's obvious she doesn't desire to see Kyle marrying Iris. The subsequent rotation finally arrives, and the regulations for the contest are established. It's a single-round match, utilizing sorcery to subdue the adversary without inflicting any severe injury. Leon Hart adds that if matters become perilous, he wants Waver to intercede. He then inquires of both of them if they concur with the regulations. Kyle then gets impudent and pointedly reminds Iris that, since his knight will be the arbiter, does she possess any objections? The maiden maintains her usual indifferent demeanor, merely replies that she has no issue whatsoever. Iris clarifies that Sir Leon Hart is a renowned, superior-level expert knight and well-known in the N-file, so she knows he won't render a biased judgment. With that, Leon Hart finally resolves to commence the contest. Iris strikes her posture and swiftly unleashes a fiery assault towards him. Kyle just grins in response, impressed by how rapid her incantations are. It's difficult to believe she's just 11 with such proficiencies, but he knows she's still considerably behind him, and he swiftly counters with his own wind sorcery. Their powers clash, and the wind effortlessly blocks the fire arrow. Iris clenches her teeth in vexation, but swiftly swings her magic staff again, thinking to herself that she hasn't even commenced to show her full might, and won't lose to a first sphere sorcerer like this. She hurls another fire arrow, this one even more intense. But Kyle saves himself with just a flick of his wand. He can't help but appreciate her fiery disposition. She clearly doesn't know when to surrender. Her magical power is quite impressive for her age, but he's determined to impart her a lesson. Kyle raises his hand and hurls a lightning assault, known as Magic Missile, an incantation that combines both lightning and his wind powers count. Neron watches in astonishment, realizing that his potential son-in-law can perform dual cast, which is a refined technique. That's almost unprecedented for a first sphere magician. Iris sees the lightning assault heading straight for her, and swiftly raises her shield to block it. But her shield is dispersed almost instantaneously, and before she knows it, Kyle is standing right in front of her. Wand in hand, Leon Hart declares, "Our protagonist the victor." And as my protagonist walks away with a satisfied smile on his countenance, he can't help but feel a sense of triumph. But this conceited maiden, on the other hand, is struggling to accept that she just lost to a first sphere magician. To save her face, she asserts that it was just pure fortune that he triumphed, because she was just in an unfavorable condition for a moment. So she obstinately demands a rematch to prove her assertion. Kyle swiftly concurs with the rematch, but he makes it evident that the outcomes won't be any different, irrespective of what after a while. They confront each other again, and this time Iris loses once more, falling to her knees in depletion. It's now the 5th round she's lost, and honestly it feels quite harsh for someone as conceited as her. He gently informs her that no matter how many times she attempts, the outcomes remain the same. He tells her to just conclude it here, since she's probably out of magical power by now. As reality sinks in her thoughts, Iris starts to feel the intensity of her defeat and begins to weep like a youth. Count Neron gets anxious and worried for her. It's not surprising, really. Despite her conceit, she's still just a youth after all. Even Kyle starts to feel a twinge of culpability, thinking about how he's made a maiden weep. He didn't desire it to come to this, but he knows it's an indispensable lesson for her. That evening at Count Neron's manor, Kyle finds himself gazing at the elegant attire the Count provided for the festivity. Looks like he's not really feeling the whole dressing up ambience. Leon Hart is knight, chimes in reminding him that even though it's a small lineage gathering, it's still a formal event and it's best to dress suitably. But Kyle is not certain why they even invited him to this festivity. After he literally made their offspring weak, Leon Hart replies that Count Naren said it was fine to impart her some severe lessons. Besides, he probably anticipated something like this would transpire. Leon Hart further indicates that since our protagonist fairly and squarely defeated Lady Iris, Count Naren seems even more determined to make him his son-in-law. Kyle lets out a sigh, stating Iris might detest him even more now. But his knight insists that's not the situation. Judging by her expression, it's likely that Lady Iris actually likes him. Our protagonist finds this strange and inquires if that's really true. Leon Hart just tells him to concentrate on getting ready for the festivity, while Urgel swiftly starts assisting him dress up. As Leon Hart observes them in the background, he can't help but lament how Lord Kyle seems to know everything about the world, but is surprisingly oblivious when it comes to affection. Once Urgel finishes adjusting his hair, she steps back and tells him he's ready. When we take a full look, my protagonist absolutely looks like a heartbreaker. Both the knight and the maiden become animated, impressed by how comely he looks. With that resolved, Kyle resolves it is time to depart since they're all ready. After getting ready for the occasion, Kyle finally arrives at the main manor, where he's warmly received by other guests of his age. A fellow with brown hair introduces himself as Myers, while the one with purple hair states he's the second scion of the Naren lineage. Looks like Mr. Purple Hair is going to be Kyle's future brother-in-law. After all, meanwhile, Count Naren is frantically surveying the area, clearly on the lookout for his offspring. He is not certain why she's running late. He even tells one of the attendants to go check on Iris. Kyle overhears this and starts to wonder if she might be upset because of him, and is avoiding the occasion because he made her weak. Eventually, one of the maidens escorts Lady Iris into the hall, and she immediately calls out to her progenitor that she's arrived. Despite her youthful age, she has a surprisingly mature ambience and looks quite graceful, rather than just charming, but she quickly gets flustered, like any youthful lady would. When she spots Kyle, who is also looking every bit the heartbreaker, she approaches him. And Kyle immediately starts thinking about how he anticipated her to weep and sulk, but contrary to what he thought. Here, she is, which is quite surprising given her disposition. Meanwhile, Iris' thoughts are swirling with her own considerations. She didn't anticipate him to look this comely. I mean, she knows he's good looking, but the elegance and aura he has is just ethereal, especially in the attire he's wearing. Finally, the Count Nero tells everyone to take their seats and commence supper. Count also makes sure that Kyle sits right next to his future spouse. However, Kyle doesn't seem too thrilled about this, because he's worried she might start weeping, or get angry that he's sitting next to her. He swiftly engages his mind's eye, and observes that her disposition characteristics haven't changed much. Despite this, it looks like her favorability toward him has increased by 30 points, which has gone from 40 to 10. This shocks Kyle, because after everything that transpired, and how she faced such a demeaning defeat, he anticipated her favorability to drop even further. Not a sin, but then he wonders if this is due to the appearance adoration characteristic she possesses. There's a chance she sees him as nothing more than an ornamental item. Anyway, Kyle savors a good supper. The atmosphere during mealtime is warmer than anticipated, and Iris is quiet, behaving quite normally in front of her lineage, without acting conceited while picking up the salt on the table. They both also accidentally touched each other's hands, while Kyle was attempting to assist her by serving her some salt, and that unforeseen touch totally flusters the lady. After that, the maiden turns her head away in embarrassment to avoid any eye contact, while Kyle is probably thinking about whether she desires the salt or not. He resolves to place it back on the table near her, and she promptly thanks him for his gesture. Kyle isn't certain what's transpiring or why she's acting so strangely. Even though her favorability has gone up, her demeanor toward him has also gotten more peculiar. I suppose Kyle is actually quite oblivious to affection. After all, I mean, who could fault him? He used to be a recluse who did nothing in his past existence, except play games. The subsequent rotation arrives. An initial thing we see is a bewildered look on Kyle's countenance. Apparently, Lady Iris is seated right in front of him, and he wasn't anticipating her to come personally just to meet him. After a graceful sip of beverage, she reminds him that she is here to uphold her pledge. Now that she has lost, he will become her mentor. So she requests him to clarify why his sorcery is so potent. She clarifies that his method is somewhat distinct from the usual, and she has never observed anything like it in any sorcery tome. She is desperate to know who instructed him. She bombards him with a multitude of queries, like whether he developed those powers by happenstance, and how he can perform dual casting so readily. She is so eager to learn everything that she literally rises from her seat in the intensity of the moment, and courteously, yet enthusiastically tells him to share everything he knows. Kyle feels overwhelmed by all her queries, and tells her to give him a moment to assimilate everything first. He commences by reminding her that if she genuinely desires to become his pupil and learn sorcery, she needs to work on her demeanor as well. Initially, Iris doesn't quite grasp what he's attempting to convey, so Kyle tells her directly that she has to be courteous to others and not be irrational. She will need to contemplate thrice before getting angry with anyone. Well, it appears like this is just too much to request of her. She attempts to object, asking why she should have to adhere to these regulations, when even her progenitor doesn't compel her to do so. But Kyle lets her know that if she can't alter her demeanor, he can't instruct her sorcery either. The lady definitely attempts to argue back, because she thinks he's being too exacting. But Kyle reminds her that he's the sole one who can utilize sorcery with a unique method he has devised. He reveals to her that he has created mixed drive sorcery, which has never been documented anywhere else, so she can't learn it from anyone but him. He even gives her a small demonstration, certain that since she is also learning sorcery, she comprehends the importance of his proficiencies. Of course, the maiden swiftly acknowledges this, stating it's true, but she still doesn't feel comfortable, as much as she detests to concede it. She reluctantly and vexedly accepts his stipulations. In the end, Kyle flashes a smile, stating he knows all too well the guileless countenance she's attempting to display, and that she can't deceive him so readily. To assist her keep her part of the agreement, he reveals that he has made some preparations beforehand. The maiden is shocked again and inquires what he's referring to, but she soon gets her answer when she sees a contract document. He clears up any lingering doubts by reminding her that if she desires to become his pupil, all she has to do is accept the stipulations and sign the agreement. As she knows, breaching a signed magic agreement triggers an absolute retribution imposed by the ancient deities, so he requests her to take it seriously. Additionally, no sorcery can nullify a magic agreement. She exclaims and inquires why he's going to such extents to make her sign, wondering if it's because he doesn't trust her. To this, Kyle doesn't shy away from admitting that yes, he doesn't entirely trust her. Understand, Kyle is convinced that if her demeanor issue could have been rectified with just pronouncements, it wouldn't still be an issue. After 11 years, it's a challenging trait to alter, and he wouldn't have gone through all this trouble if it were an easy remedy. He further tells her that this magic agreement was originally given to him after the contest yesterday. Her progenitor came to Kyle, requesting him to instruct his offspring well. After observing Kyle's proficiency firsthand, he was certain that only our protagonist could get through to her. The indulgent progenitor, almost in tears, even stated that if Iris refused to listen to him, Kyle had consent to utilize this magic agreement on her, one of the only two genuine agreements in their lineage. Now, in the present, Iris feels embarrassed and bewildered, realizing her progenitor is the one who entangled her in this. She's convinced Head never state anything like that, so she tells Kyle Head better not be fabricated, determined to get answers. She starts to hasten back to her progenitor to ask him personally. What's transpiring, Kyle just sits as she begins to depart, but then he lets out a weary sigh. He calls out, telling her to halt right there, adding that if she turns back now, their agreement will be null and void. And if that transpires, he won't be able to see her again, let alone instruct her any sorcery. This tiding catches Urgel completely unprepared. Kyle, however, remains firm and tells her to resolve now. He asks if she's going to sign and learn his sorcery, or if she'll refuse and depart this chamber for good. He makes it evident that if she chooses the latter, they'll never encounter again. He asks her one final time if she desires to learn sorcery, or will she refuse and depart this chamber, after which they'll never see each other again. Kyle smiles, inwardly thinking this might be her final rotation of throwing fits and displaying a demeanor, and he's looking forward to seeing her alter for the better. He knows that while Iris possesses a rare SSS class talent, if her character keeps causing trouble, he'll have no choice but to abandon her. He needs trustworthy colleagues and subordinates, not someone he has to constantly placate in every predicament. Iris, on the other hand, finally gathers the courage to speak. After taking the pen in hand, she obstinately declares that if she states she'll do something, she'll do it with that. She finally commences perusing the agreement. Albeit reluctantly, Kyle just gives her a smile and tells her to make sure she peruses all the stipulations carefully before signing in the agreement. Party A is Kyle, while Party B represents Iris. As we observe the agreement page, it's no surprise she's feeling reluctant to sign. The stipulations go way beyond what she can endure, and if she breaches any of the outlined regulations, she'll face a stomach discomfort as a retribution. The maiden inquires if stomach discomforts are really indispensable, to which Kyle just smiles and states, a little stomach discomfort won't be so unfavorable. Even Iris seems somewhat surprised by this. She anticipated the retribution to be more perilous, but this is actually something she thinks she can manage. So, eventually, she concurs with the stipulations, deducing that since the discomfort won't be severe, she doesn't have to worry too much about adhering to everything strictly. But then something suddenly strikes her, and she observes that the retribution for Regulation 7 is quite severe. She'll have her magic sphere terminated if she doesn't adhere to it. She inquires if she'll have to join the confrontation, and Kyle affirms it without reluctance, reminding her that if she's afraid of combat, there's no need for her to learn stronger sorcery. He raises a query asking why she even desires to learn sorcery. She goes silent for a moment, then admits that she desires to be superior to others because she relishes defeating and subduing them. She desires everyone to look up to her and admire her, and she's always cherished being the center of notice. That's why she commenced studying sorcery in the initial instance. But lately learning sorcery has become enjoyable for its own sake. She started to relish learning new things and improving herself, so studying all night wouldn't even feel arduous. Kyle is utterly astounded by her perspective, and a smirk spreads across his countenance as he sees the extraordinary desire to triumph and improve shining on her countenance. He's genuinely looking forward to seeing her transformation. Understand the best aptitude for becoming a sorcerer doesn't depend on the amount of magical power one possesses, but rather on intellectual inquisitiveness, eagerness to learn about sorcery, and a desire for power. Without these qualities, she won't become mightier. These are the traits that accompany Manhwa. She desires stronger sorcery and greater power. And with that resolve, she finally signs the agreement. Both the agreement and the pen magically levitate in the air and fly directly toward Kyle. He extends his hand for a shake, looking forward to collaborating with her in the future, hoping that Iris will become a strong companion of his. For a moment, she remains silent. But when the words truly sink in, she feels utterly embarrassed at the prospect of being his companion. She freaks out so much that her long tresses nearly come undone. Kyle attempts to clear the air by reminding her that he didn't mean companions like that, but just as part of the unit. However, Iris tells him he should have chosen his words more cautiously. Now that they're done, she abruptly departs the chamber, and it seems this oblivious fellow still has no inkling why she acted that way. Even his knight standing behind him gets it, thinking Kyle could stand to be somewhat more cautious with his words, especially with a countenance as comely like his. And then there's Urgel, who doesn't look too thrilled about the new rivalry in this unreciprocated affection later. That evening, Urgel bluntly inquires of Kyle if he's planning to marry Iris. Of course, this unforeseen query nearly chokes him, and he exclaims, asking what in the world she's referring to. He reminds her that Iris is only 11 and he himself is just 13. They're not even at the age to contemplate matrimony, it seems. Kyle still has no clue why Urgel would ask him such a query, and he just wonders why everyone is so keen to get him wedded off. So young Urgel then inquires if he's really not thinking about it, to which he replies that he is not. Besides, he has way too much labor to do presently. Meanwhile, in the back of his thoughts, he's thinking about how the world could end soon, and he doesn't have time for courting or matrimony. So he simply tells this inquisitive maiden that he'll think about matrimony and stuff like that after he's at least 18. Urgel acknowledges this, then casually remarks that her mother is a comely woman, so she's certain she'll grow up to be comely too. With that, she departs. Wishing him a good evening, Kyle Left Behind feels both embarrassed and flustered, wondering why she would even bring something like that up. Kyle thinks about how youths in this era seem somewhat more mature. Even Urgel seems to be concerned about matrimony already. He feels flustered as he considers that she's already quite comely, but shall likely become even more comely as she matures. Then he recalls something about her mother. Urgel came from the Halayam Baron lineage, but after her lineage fell into desolation, they were divested of their social standing, and she was sold into servitude. Her progenitor and siblings are deceased, but her mother and sister are supposedly still living. However, he doesn't know where they are. He deduces Urgel must be inquisitive about her lineage, but she hasn't brought it up, which makes him wonder if she doesn't desire to know where they are, or if it's too agonizing for her to discuss. Irrespective of the situation, he's determined to find out what's transpiring. A few rotations later, Kyle and his group take the carriage back to their manor. As it departs, Kyle waves his final farewells to Count Naren and his lineage. Iris feels a twinge of sorrow and wonders why Kyle had to depart so urgently. He could have remained a few more rotations. Observing her expression, the Count can't help but notice how much his offspring seems to like Kyle. He attempts to cheer her up, telling her not to be too upset, since Kyle will be back next moon to instruct her sorcery. Annoyed and embarrassed by her progenitor's comment, Iris insists she doesn't like Kyle whatsoever, just finds him vexing. She even attempts to act indifferent, stating that when he comes next moon, she won't even open the portal for him. But right at that instant, she feels a sharp discomfort in her stomach. That makes her double over and collapse to the earth in agony. The Count recalls Kyle's words about how Iris should contemplate thrice before getting angry, elsewise her stomach would hurt. This makes him believe that the stomach discomfort she's feeling must be from the magic agreement. He swiftly tells her not to be angry and to contemplate thrice before stating anything irrational. If she restrains her anger, her stomach will cease hurting. But of course, how can she not be angry? She can't help but tear up and calls Kyle a cad. She's so loud that even Kyle can hear her from his carriage, and he can't help but think someone is cursing him from afar. After that noteworthy sojourn at Count Naren's manor, Kyle and his companions finally return to Enfile. The initial thing we see is Kyle's bewildered expression. He looks shocked because his sibling, Abel, has apparently procured a massive quantity of grain from Enfile. For some unknown reason, Kyle's quite certain he never mentioned anything about the impending dearth to his sibling, so he can't comprehend why Abel would suddenly procure grain. Abel clarifies that after listening to his younger sibling, he just had a strong intuition about it, so he resolved to procure some too. When Kyle inquires how much he procured, Abel gestures with his digits, though it's difficult to discern exactly what Abel is attempting to convey, since the view is obscured. But irrespective of the quantity it is, it's sufficient to shock Kyle to his very core. He's stunned to learn that his sibling has procured 100 times more grain. The superior, it would be Abel, further comforts Kyle that, even if he ultimately suffers a deficit on the grain, he won't hold his younger sibling accountable, since the choice to procure all that grain was entirely his own. Kyle recognizes this and affirms that he's not genuinely anxious about that. In reality, he cannot dismiss the thought of how Abel is going to accumulate in some substantial earnings. Out of inquisitiveness, Kyle tells his sibling that he's certain Abel could triumph anything just by acquiring a lottery ticket once, to which Abel replies that he's never contemplated acquiring a lottery ticket because it doesn't befit someone of his standing. Of course, he's never attempted it, since he's already quite affluent. Kyle feels somewhat envious, as he admires the foresight and fortune his sibling seems to possess. The view then shifts to the training area, where we observe someone brandishing a blade like a total champion. This blade wielder is none other than Kyle's progenitor, whose designation I seem to have forgotten. Kyle arrives on the scene, appearing as if he's been summoned by his progenitor. His progenitor inquires if his journey to Enfilum proceeded well, to which Kyle replies that he's appreciative to Count Naren for treating him so well, and that he had a comfortable sojourn. While wiping the perspiration from his countenance, the progenitor states that he just received a missive from Count Naren, where he learned that Kyle pledged to instruct Lady Iris sorcery. Kyle acknowledges this and adds that it sort of just transpired by destiny, clarifying that The offspring of that household is quite a unique and talented lady. His progenitor believes this could be a good experience for him, so he encourages Kyle to try his utmost in instructing her. However, Kyle starts to envision Iris' conceited disposition and isn't so certain he can actually have a good experience with her. Kyle further inquires of his progenitor if the Count mentioned anything else besides the sorcery lessons. His progenitor thinks for a moment, then recalls that Count Nayran did bring up the subject of Lady Iris and a possible betrothal. However, he assures Kyle that it's not the Celtarian lineage tradition to get betrothed so prematurely, especially when neither of the elder scions are betrothed yet. This comes as a big relief to Kyle, who's been attempting to avoid the subject for a duration. He concurs with his progenitor, stating that there's still a lot he has to learn. He further reminds his progenitor that he needs to make up for the time he lost due to his past maladies, so he hopes his progenitor can persuade the Count to hold off on any betrothal plans. For now, his progenitor concurs, and Kyle thanks him sincerely. Kyle lets out a sigh of relief, pleased to realize there won't be any more betrothal discussions after this. His progenitor calls out to him again, reminding him that he has no intent of compelling him into a political matrimony. Kyle is perplexed by this statement and requests clarification. His progenitor then clarifies that he was never officially wedded to Kyle's mother, and it wasn't due to her inferior stand, but rather because she never intended to marry him. She went along with it, had offspring, but never formalized the matrimony. Kyle's progenitor attempted to inquire of her about her reasons and comforted her that he didn't care about her social stand, stressing that there wouldn't be any issue since she was going to give birth to the heir of the Celtarian lineage. He mentioned that even his subordinates supported his choice to marry her. However, Kyle's mother told him that she had been the late Marchioness attendant and wished to apologize to the former Marchioness. She expressed that she didn't think she could confront the two youthful masters who had just recently lost their mother. It appears like Marchioness was the former spouse of Kyle's progenitor, and that Abel and Adolf belonged to her. This clarifies why Kyle has white hair, while his elder siblings have blonde hair. Marky then tells his scion that he cherished his mother, which is why he was born. He advises Kyle that when selecting a spouse, he might consider the lineage's advantages, but he doesn't necessarily need to fret about disparities in stand. His progenitor pledges to support him in any situation, irrespective of what he assures his scion that he means it. Whatever choice Kyle makes, he will be by his side to support him. All this discussion leaves Kyle without words, as it was totally unforeseen from the Marquis. He wonders if the Marquis actually has an indulgent progenitor's heart, after all, and if he feels some empathy for him. However, this cannot be true, because the youngest offspring is usually never considered a candidate for succession due to their absence of sway. If the youngest offspring marries the offspring of a potent lineage and gains great sway, there is a high likelihood of conflict emerging over succession. His progenitor is a man who values lineage success above familial relations, and until the succession structure is completely stabilized, Kyle desires to avoid getting into trouble. Now he comprehends that this is what his progenitor is anxious about. Kyle finally concurs with his progenitor and attempts to dismiss it by stating that since he is youthful, he doesn't know much about intricate matters. For now, it's important to remain as the innocuous youngest offspring. By the way, I finally recalled that our protagonist progenitor's name is Remton. Anyhow, Kyle inquires if he has consent to depart, since they discussed everything he came for, and he needs to go study at the library. When Remton gives Kyle consent to depart, our protagonist begins to stride out of the location promptly. As Remton observes Kyle depart, he reflects on how swiftly his scion altered the subject when his mother was mentioned. What bothers him even more is that Kyle doesn't even call him progenitor. He pulls out a locket, and as we take a closer look, we see a photograph of Kyle's mother, Aisha. Gazing at her image, Remton wonders if she too harbored animosity toward him. Meanwhile, as Kyle walks through the quiet passageway, he replays his progenitor's words about supporting him in his thoughts. For a brief instant, he considers whether Remton might actually care about it, but just as he is thinking it through, He snaps back to reality, suddenly recalling. He forgot to tell his progenitor about the plunder he got from the catacomb. He completely overlooked it because of the subject his progenitor brought up. Kyle wonders if he should go back and share everything. But the thought of talking to his progenitor again leaves him reluctant. He had instructed Leon Hart not to inform the Marquis about the catacomb until Kyle reported it himself. And now our protagonist is inquisitive to see if Leon Hart will honor his word or prioritize his allegiance to the Marquis, still uncertain about whether he should report to his progenitor or handle the matter on his own. His thoughts are conflicted between heading to the library or talking about the catacomb. As he wrestles with these considerations, he unexpectedly collides into someone. The man Kyle collided with apologizes, but as this newcomer takes a closer look, he realizes it's Kyle. It doesn't take long for Kyle to recognize that the individual in front of him is Duke Hiltarion, the third scion of the lineage. Kyle finds it amusing that just as the subject of their mother comes up, he coincidentally encounters his third sibling. He can't help but notice how much taller the third scion has gotten since the last time they encountered. Even though Duke is only 2 years elder than Kyle, he still is in much superior condition. Kyle deduces it must be due to the training he's received as a knight from a youthful age. He's heard that the third scion became a junior officer not long ago. The elder sibling, Duke, then promptly inquires of Kyle why he's here, given that their progenitor has explicitly instructed him not to approach the main edifice. Kyle clarifies that he was released from confinement by their progenitor's choice after he recognized his achievements in serving the populace. Duke is clearly uncertain of what that signifies, so he bluntly inquires of Kyle what he's planning to concoct next, and what kind of trouble he's attempting to instigate by feigning to be mature. This instance, well, there you go again, this fellow seems like a big bully sibling. To comprehend why the third scion seems so hostile toward Kyle, we learn that the Duke resented his younger sibling. Kyle, who was 2 years younger, had always caused their mother, Aisha, constant anxiety. Her health deteriorated from the stress of fearing that Kyle might perish young. One rotation. While the Duke was grappling with culpability over their mother's coldness, Kyle stormed in and casually inquired why their mother was so silent. That's when the third scion broke the news to him that their mother had passed away. Kyle, who had been indulged and somewhat insensitive back then, just chuckled in response, remarking that he never thought she'd perish before him. This infuriated the third scion, who lashed out, pinning Kyle to the partition and yelling at him for speaking so carelessly about someone who had cared about him for so long. The Duke blamed Kyle for their mother's demise, but Kyle got angry and jerked his siblings' hands away in order to liberate himself. He made it evident that if their mother perished because of him, then whose culpability was it that he could perish at any instant? He believed it was somewhat his mother's culpability for bringing him into the world with this kind of physique. The Duke's endurance wore thin, and he punched Kyle hard in the countenance, sending him crashing to the earth. He called Kyle worse than an animal and stated that he had only restrained himself all this time because of their mother. But he wouldn't let Kyle transgress any more boundaries now. With that, he resolved to walk away, after stating that he does not have any younger siblings anymore. In the present instant, Kyle finally comprehends why the Duke detests him so much, and he is certain that this kind of conflict won't be resolved readily. The Duke continues his taunts, calling Kyle out for feigning to be mature. He tells him to just get lost and never return to the main edifice again, even though Kyle comprehends the reasons behind his siblings' hostility. He isn't going to act like a recipient for his affronts, so he replies to his elder sibling by stating that, since the head of the household has officially released him from his confinement and allowed him to enter the main edifice, what the Duke is demanding is basically a challenge to the authority of the household's head. To drive his assertion home, Kyle asks if the Duke's directives are more important than those of the head of the household. This remark not only silences the Duke for a moment, but also vexes him to no end. He balls up his fist in vexation, ready to strike Kyle, but his attempt fails when Adolf suddenly appears and seizes the Duke's hand midair before it can connect with Kyle's countenance. Kyle is shocked to see Adolf here because he didn't even notice him approaching. Meanwhile, the Duke looks completely bewildered at his elder sibling's sudden appearance. Adolf tells the Duke that, Striking youthful individuals isn't befitting for someone like him, especially not in the main edifice where their progenitor is present. The third scion's eyes well up with apprehension, and he doesn't waste any time before apologizing. But Adolf tells him to apologize to Kyle. Not surprisingly. The Duke refuses to apologize to Kyle. After offering a lukewarm apology to his elder sibling again, he resolves to take his leave, leaving Kyle in silence, completely bewildered about what just transpired. Adolf reflects on how obstinate the Duke is, and wonders who he takes after to be that way. Meanwhile, Kyle can't help but shoot skeptical looks at Adolf for conveniently appearing out of nowhere, making him wonder if Adolf had been observing them from afar all along. Anyhow, Adolf inquires of Kyle if he's injured anywhere, and assures him that the Duke doesn't usually act like that. Kyle acknowledges this, and admits he has made a lot of errors in the past. So it's comprehensible that the Duke doesn't believe him. That's when Adolf places his hand on Kyle's diminutive shoulder and leans in closer to murmur in his ear that he trusts his younger sibling. Kyle thanks his elder sibling outwardly, but inwardly, this is precisely what he desired to hear. Adolf then reveals that the Duke has been learning swordsmanship from him lately, but no matter how much the Duke trains, his proficiencies don't seem to improve. It's like he's reached his limit due to his average talent and aura. With that stated, Adolf reminds Kyle that he's a sorcerer who has overcome his Hermawud disability and is now on a completely different echelon than the average Duke. The fact that Adolf is stating all this demonstrates he finds Kyle more intriguing and desires to instruct him swordsmanship. Instead of the Duke, he suggests that since the Duke and Kyle don't get along well, he can instruct them separately. Kyle is surprised to hear that the Duke is learning swordsmanship from Adolf, but he can also sense that Adolf intends for him to clash with the Duke, and he sees right through it. So Kyle just laughs it off, stating he's still only in the first sphere and have a lot more to learn in the future. For now, he desires to head to the library, so he takes his leave as he walks. He still wonders why Adolf is interested in instructing an average individual like Duke anything understand. Adolf is definitely not the type to take good care of his younger sibling, and there's no reason for him to go through all that trouble just to provoke Kyle in the Fantasy Defense's original narrative. The Duke doesn't survive any of the routs after the uprising, and was it just a happenstance that Adolf slew the Duke? In every rout, it seems improbable. This makes Kyle certain that the Duke might be concealing a confidence he doesn't know about. The view then shifts to the comely countryside, a serene location where I wish to live my existence. There we encounter Leon Hart in casual attire, carrying a package with him, to find out what he's doing away from the manor. The view flashes back somewhat to when he had a dialogue with Remton. He reveals to his senior that Kyle did well. In Infilum, Remton acknowledges this, and reflects how this report also matches what Cal Naren mentioned in his missive. He then inquires of Leon Hart if anything else intriguing transpired on the way there, or during the return to the manor. The knight goes silent for a moment. Wavering to reply, he recalls the pledge he made with Kyle about keeping the catacomb and the plunder a confidence for now. So he replies accordingly that there wasn't anything else noteworthy. Either they only encountered a few inferior level creatures, but they were not that menacing. The head of the lineage smiles to hear this and tells the knight to take good care of Kyle. He feels relieved that someone as proficient as Leon Hart is by Kyle's side. Back in the present, Leon Hart reflects on how he ultimately prioritized Kyle's directives over his superiors. We also learn that he's here to meet his progenitor. At that instant, a man calls out to him, and when Leon Hart looks up, he spots his progenitor in front of him. Once they both sit down to catch up, his progenitor inquires how long he'll be on vacation this instance, to which Leon Hart replies that he'll be free for about half a rotation. His progenitor is not really thrilled to hear this, since it's been an eternity when they spent time together. Leon Hart replies that he'll come whenever he has time. His progenitor then remarks that he's heard a hearsay that the little youthful master Kyle has suddenly matured somewhat these rotations. This unforeseen query startles Leon Hart initially, but he swiftly concurs with his progenitor, asserting that Kyle has indeed become much more dignified lately. He further remarks that he didn't anticipate to ultimately escorting Kyle for this long. Initially his plan, after escorting Lord Kyle once, was to return to the Knights of the Celtarian and continue his labor. His progenitor looks at him and can read the bewilderment on his countenance. So he attempts to open up. He asked his scion if his thoughts have altered since then. To this, Leonard admits he's not quite certain what he desires to do. His thoughts then wander back to a time when Kyle resolved to provide him with a new blade. Kyle tells him that the blade he used before was too feeble to handle the aura of a superior level. Expert knight, if he poured everything he had into it, the blade would fracture. So he always had to suppress his aura to some degree. Leon Hart inquires how he knows about this, to which Kyle replies that he has studied similar subjects, because sorcerers need a basic comprehension of not only sorcery, but also aura, but truth to be told. Our protagonist learned all this after playing this game, all rotation. Kyle then further states that Leon Hart has been lacking a new blade for quite some time now, since he was busy with his guard duty all the time. He didn't get the chance to get a new one. So Kyle always felt unfavorable about that. But now that Leon Hart has a new blade, he feels quite relieved Leon Hart is rendered without words in response, and swiftly assures Kyle that even if what he stated is true, he shouldn't feel unfavorable just because of him. But Kyle wins over Leon Hart's heart even more, where he flashes a smile and expresses how deeply he cares about his knight. Those words, my knight, strike a deep resonance with Leon Hart, as had never heard anything so sincere from a Marquis before. In the present, Leon Hart reflects on how Marquis Rempton has many devoted aides who have been by his side since his youth. Leon Hart has always felt somewhat excluded, knowing he can't genuinely find his place among them, whether it's proficiency level or his bond with the Marquis. He feels he has nothing that compares to those around him. But that's when his progenitor clears up his bewilderment, encouraging him to just do whatever he desires. And if he desires to stick with Kyle, he should gladly do so. His progenitor reminds him of how it was the same when he joined the Knights Academy. Although they belonged to a barren lineage, they were aristocrats only in designation. The lineage's circumstances weren't favorable back then, and they didn't have the opulence of hiring a proper swordsmanship instructor. However, when Leon Hart turned 15, he took the entrance examination on his own, passed it, and became a knight. His progenitor reminds him that the answer is already in his heart. He just hasn't been able to state it yet. He tells Leon Hart to feel confident in whatever choice he makes, assuring him that the Marquis would comprehend the reasons behind his choice. Then his progenitor inquires if he's the sole knight the Marquis has. Leon Hart replies that there isn't a simple answer to that query, but he does concur that for Kyle, he is the sole knight they have. Just as they're conversing away, they hook a fish, and it looks like they're going to have a good catch for supper. After all, meanwhile, back at the manor, the initial thing we see is Adolph's shocked countenance when he learns that Abel came to enlist Kyle. He swiftly tosses the tome away he was holding and inquires of Kyle if he concurred with it, to which Kyle comforts him positively, stating if that were the situation, he wouldn't have come here to report this tiding. Kyle feels vexed at how Abel tossed the tome aside like this, but he does not express his disapproval audibly. Instead, he replies to his sibling's query, clarifying that he was just as surprised when brother Abel suddenly approached him and invited him to join. He admits that given the big age disparity, brother Abel had never spoken to him before, so it was somewhat intimidating. Adolph then replies with a cold, vexed tone, stating there's no possibility Abel would approach him without some ulterior motive. He goes on asserting that Abel has always been like that and never moves unless there's an advantage involved. He's certain Abel must have noticed Kyle learning sorcery, which is why he's now acting like an elder sibling. Adolph reminds Kyle that during the entire time he was ill, Abel never once came to check on him. As Adolph continues, attempting to persuade Kyle by indicating how awful Abel's character is, our protagonist is left without words, not certain what to state after losing one of his greatest men. Baron Jerome gone, losing another proficient individual would be a pity, so he can't permit himself to lose Kyle to Abel, even though Kyle is still just a one-sphere sorcerer. Adolph sees tons of potential in him. Kyle, meanwhile, smiles, inwardly observing how Adolph criticizes Abel for not visiting him while he was ill, when the same could be stated for Adolph, who also never came to check on him. Kyle reflects on how both of his siblings only seem to approach him when they require something, but he realizes he's culpable of the same thing, especially since he desires to defeat the shadowy immortal, menacing the security of the continent. So the power of the renowned swordsmanship of Kalteri is absolutely indispensable for that. However, for the survival of their lineage, Adolf should be the one to take a blow. Adolf remarks that Abel has been acting suspiciously lately, noting hearsay that he's procured a lot of grain from Enfiling. It's perplexing, and he can't discern why Abel would require such large quantities. Kyle adds that he too procured grain for his sorcery investigation, suggesting there's a chance Abel might also be attempting to study sorcery, like him. But Adolf swiftly reminds him that Abel doesn't possess a magic sphere. We can tell that Kyle is just bluffing about the whole sorcery, learning thing, but it seems Adolf has accepted the fabrication and thinks that Kyle just doesn't realize that Abel doesn't possess a sphere. Kyle keeps feigning along, apologizing and stating he doesn't know much about Abel anyway. Adolf seizes the tome Kyle tossed earlier and tells his sibling that they need to mature even more in the future. He requests Kyle to assist his elder sibling mature swiftly. Kyle grins widely as he seizes the tome and concurs, stating he'll definitely assist his elder sibling. With that, he resolves to depart for now. Meanwhile, outside the portal, we see Urgel standing there. Just as she's waiting, Daisy arrives and immediately starts clarifying herself. She tells Urgel that her lineage has been taken captive by Adolf, and if she doesn't do as he states, hell, do anything to achieve his objectives. So she felt she had no choice but to adhere. But Urgel flatly tells her not to appear in front of Lord Kyle again. Daisy grows impatient, and her countenance contorts with vexation, as she reminds Urgel that since she doesn't have any lineage, she does not have to fret about it either, which clarifies why Urgel can't comprehend her predicament. Urgel stands her ground and does not let Daisy's words sway her, while Daisy storms off after dropping those harsh bombs. Right at that instant, Urgel's familiar arrives, after sensing the emotional turmoil she's feeling within. Since her pet is closely tied to her emotions, the little familiar attempts to cheer her up. But Urgel comforts her that she isn't offended by anything. Daisy stated as long as she has Kyle by her side, she doesn't feel alone whatsoever. The little furball inquires of her about her lineage, and Urgel replies that they're difficult to find, and she doesn't even know if they're living. Besides, she doesn't desire to cause any more trouble for Lord Kyle. She knows what transpires to the women who are sold off, and if she hadn't encountered Kyle back then, she might not have been here to see this rotation. So she's determined to become stronger for Lord Kyle.